Hey guys, tonight we are going to close our eyes in our soft, clean, temperature-controlled beds and try to imagine what it was truly like to get a night's sleep in the Middle Ages. Picture yourself right now, tucked under a duvet, maybe with a memory foam pillow cradling your head. Now, let's trade all of that for a world of biting cold, scratchy straw and companions of both the human and six-legged variety. Your chances of waking up refreshed and ready to seize the day are, let's be honest, slim. Your chances of waking up with a new skin rash and a profound sense of existential dread, significantly higher. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It's always a huge boost to see our little community of history lovers grow, and as always, I'd love to see where and when you're listening from, so drop your city and local time in the comments below. It's fascinating to see our stories reach all corners of the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The day's back-breaking work is finally over. From before sunrise until the last sliver of light faded from the sky, you were in the fields, your muscles screaming with a familiar deep-seated ache. Now, you push open the heavy, ill-fitting wooden plank that serves as your front door and step across the threshold. You're not stepping onto a clean wooden floor or cool stone tiles. You're stepping onto the earth itself. The floor of your home is simply packed dirt, cold and perpetually damp, smelling richly of soil, spilled ale, and something vaguely animal. Welcome home. This is your entire world under one roof. A single square room that serves as kitchen, living room, workshop, and tonight, our bedroom. You live in what architects of the time would have called a cruck house. Two massive naturally curved timbers, harvested from the same tree, are raised to form an A-frame, and this is the basic skeleton of your dwelling. The walls are a classic example of wattle and daub construction. It's a bit like medieval drywall, if drywall were made of woven sticks and smeared with a thick plaster of mud, clay, straw, and yes, a generous helping of cow dung. You might think of it as charmingly rustic, the ultimate in sustainable, locally sourced building materials. But as you run a hand over the lumpy, uneven surface, you feel a dozen different drafts whispering through invisible cracks. There is no insulation, no vapour barrier, no concept of sealing the envelope of the house. The wind outside is a constant, unwelcome roommate. In the centre of the room, a small fire pit glows with the day's last embers. This is your hearth, your only source of heat and light. There is no chimney. A small, strategically placed hole in the thatched roof is supposed to let the smoke out, but it's a terribly inefficient system. A permanent hazy cloud hangs in the upper half of the room, stinging your eyes and catching in the back of your throat. You've learned to live with the constant smell of wood smoke clinging to your hair, your clothes, and your very skin. On the plus side, that same smoke slowly cures the strips of salted meat you have hanging from the rafters, and it does a passable, if not perfect, job of discouraging some of the insects that live in the thatch above you. Look up. Your roof is a thick layer of straw or reeds, a perfect, cosy home for mice, spiders, and a whole ecosystem of things that crawl and skitter. Sometimes, in the dead of night, you'll hear them, a soft rustling that is both a comfort and a quiet horror. The dim light from the dying fire casts huge dancing shadows that make the small space feel both immense and claustrophobic. Your modern brain, so used to the flick of a switch flooding a room with sterile, even light, struggles to adjust. Here, the darkness is a living thing, pooling in the corners and clinging to the ceiling. You're not alone, of course. Your family is already here, moving about as quiet silhouettes. Your parents, your siblings, maybe an elderly grandparent huddled close to the fire's warmth. Privacy is a concept as foreign and luxurious as a silk pillow. Every sigh, every cough, every sniffle is a communal experience. As the last embers of the fire begin to fade, the room is plunged into a profound, almost absolute blackness, broken only by a sliver of moonlight forcing its way through a crack in the wall. The cold, which had been held at bay by the fire, begins to creep back in immediately. It seeps up from the dirt floor, radiates from the thin walls, and falls from the cavernous darkness of the roof. There is no thermostat to nudge, no extra blanket to grab from a linen closet. The only source of warmth for the rest of the night will be the shared body heat of your family. Historians still argue whether the family's most prized livestock, a pig or a few chickens, would have been kept in a small attached lean-to or simply brought inside on the most frigid nights. Tonight, As the temperature plummets, you almost hope for the pig. At least it's a living furnace. You close the door, sliding a heavy wooden bar into place. It's not so much for security against thieves, you have nothing worth stealing, but to keep out the wind and whatever wild things might be sniffing around in the dark. The sound of the bar thudding home is the final definitive end to the day. The world is now shrunk to these 4 lumpy walls, this smoky air, this shared, bone-deep weariness. And now, in this cold, dark, crowded room, you must somehow find a way to sleep. The heavy thud of the wooden bar echoes in the small dark room. That sound is a full stop on the day. Your world, which for 12 hours was the vast expanse of muddy fields and open sky, has now shrunk to the size of this smoky, cramped hovel. The feeble orange glow of the embers in the central hearth is all that's left of the light, and it's fading fast, pulling the shadows out from the corners and stretching them into monstrous shapes on the wattle and daub walls. The cold, leaving only the dominant aroma of dust and decay. Historians debate just how often a typical peasant family could afford to change their bedding straw. Was it a yearly ritual, timed with the harvest? Or did it only happen when the palliasse became so compacted, so foul, so utterly infested, that even by medieval standards it was unbearable? For now this is your lot. You rest your head, not on a soft pillow, but on a small, smooth log of wood that you've claimed as your own. It keeps your head off the drafty floor, but the hard, unyielding surface promises a stiff neck by morning. Your sister, lying beside you, has wadded up a spare bit of cloth. Your father, at the far end, has nothing. He simply lies flat, one arm tucked under his head. Your only covering is a single, heavy woolen blanket shared between 3 of you. It's a coarse, greasy thing that smells perpetually of wood smoke and damp wool. It's itchy and too small, leading to a silent, passive-aggressive tug-of-war that will last until dawn. You pull it over your shoulder, and your brother's back is exposed to the cold. He shivers and pulls it back, leaving your feet to freeze. It's a nightly, unwinnable battle. So here you are, lying in the dark on a lumpy sack of bug-infested straw, listening to the rustle of your own movements and the soft breathing of your family. A sharp bit of straw is digging into your ribs, an itch is starting on your scalp. The log pillow is already sending a complaint down your spine. The air is cold, the blanket is insufficient, and the darkness is absolute. This isn't a retreat from the day's hardships. It's just a different kind of hardship, a low-grade, persistent misery that stands between you and the oblivion of sleep. You close your eyes, not with the gentle sigh of a person drifting off to dreamland, but with the grim resignation of someone settling in for a long, uncomfortable wait until morning. The great woolen blanket tug-of-war continues for another moment, a silent, sleepy battle of inches. But then your brother, whose back was exposed to the creeping cold, shuffles closer, pressing his warmth against you. A moment later, your sister on the other side does the same. The battle for the blanket ceases, not because of a truce, but because a more effective strategy has been engaged, the huddle. This isn't just a bed you're in, it's a human nest, and the only reliable source of heat for the next 8 hours is packed in here with you. You are lying in the very middle of the palliasse, a prime position you probably secured through some combination of speed and sheer luck. On one side, your 2 younger siblings. On the other, your mother, and beyond her your father, positioned on the outer edge. This is the family bed. Singular. The concept of each person, or even each couple, having their own private bed is a fantasy reserved for the highest ekelts of the nobility, and even they often shared their chambers. For you, and for the vast majority of people in this world, this is it. One bed for the entire household. Let's take a quick census of who's here. There's you, your mother, your father, and your 2 siblings. That's 5 people. Tucked at the foot of the bed, curled into a tight shivering ball, is no longer challenged by a proper fire, asserts its authority. You feel it seep up from the packed earth floor through the thin soles of your leather turn shoes, a damp, insistent chill that aims right for the bones. Your family moves with the slow, practiced economy of the profoundly tired. There's no bedtime routine to speak of, no brushing of teeth or changing into soft pyjamas. You simply shed the outermost mud-caked layer of clothing, which might just be your only cloak, and prepare to lie down. But where? Your eyes adjust to the gloom, and you look toward the designated sleeping area. Tucked against the far wall, the one most sheltered from the drafty door is the family bed. Don't picture a bed frame, not even a simple wooden one. That's a luxury for a craftsman in town, maybe even a minor landholder. What you have is a palliasse. It is in essence a giant sack, roughly woven from coarse, scratchy canvas. It's about the size of a modern queen mattress, but there, all resemblance to comfort ends. This sack, this bed tick, is stuffed with the cheapest, most abundant filling imaginable. Straw. It's the leftover stalks from the last grain harvest, and it's your nightly cradle. You've heard whispers from merchants and travellers about the origins of the mattress, a concept brought back from the Crusades. The word itself comes from the Arabic matra, which simply means something thrown down, or place where something is thrown. That feels devastatingly accurate right now. This is not furniture. This is just a thing thrown on the floor. As you approach, the faint musty smell hits you. It's the smell of dry, slowly decaying vegetable matter, of dust, and of the faint sour scent of human bodies. You find your designated spot and lower yourself onto the sack. The landing is not soft. The straw, fresh and fluffy months ago, has been compressed by the weight of your entire family night after night. It's become a dense, lumpy mat, hard in some places, alarmingly thin in others. A rogue stalk, sharp as a needle, pokes insistently through the canvas and into your back. You shift, trying to find a hollow that fits the curve of your hip, but it's a futile exercise. Every movement is accompanied by a loud, dry rustling that announces your restlessness to the entire room. It's the sound of 1,000 tiny skeletons crackling under your weight. And you are not alone in this straw. This palliasse is a universe, a thriving, self-contained ecosystem. It is teeming with life that is not your own. You can't see them in the dark, but you know they are there. You can feel them. The occasional maddening itch on your ankle, the tickle on your neck. These are the tiny companions that share your bed. Fleas, lice, and mites. They live, breed, and die in the warmth of the straw, feasting on the flakes of skin shed by your family and, of course, on your blood. It's a nightly tax you pay for the privilege of lying down. This is one of the great equalizers of your age. Even kings and queens complain in their royal correspondence about the very same pests. Sometimes, in a desperate attempt at medieval pest control, your mother would have mixed fragrant herbs in with the straw. Plants like fleabane, wormwood, or meadowsweet were thought to repel the insects and perhaps mask the growing odours. You vaguely remember the pleasant scent when the bedding was last changed, but their power has long since faded. Your elderly grandmother. Her coughing fits sometimes wake everyone, but her small frame takes up little room. 6 people. This arrangement isn't accidental. It's a masterpiece of thermal efficiency. The most vulnerable, the very young and the very old, are typically placed in the centre of the human pile, insulated from the cold drafts by the larger, stronger bodies of the working adults. Your father, as the family's protector, sleeps on the outermost edge, closest to the door. It's the coldest and most dangerous position, but it means he's the first line of defence against whatever threat might come from the darkness. This nightly cuddle is driven by 2 of humanity's most basic needs: warmth and security. The warmth part is obvious. Your little hovel is a sieve for heat. The moment the fire dies, the ambient temperature inside begins to plummet, striving to match the freezing air outside. The single, shared woolen blanket, greasy and precious as it is, can only do so much. It traps a layer of air, but the real furnace is you. It's your father's body, your mother's, your sister's. Each of you is a living, breathing hot water bottle. By pressing together, you minimise the surface area exposed to the cold and maximise your shared thermal output. You've instinctively traded your personal bubble for a personal furnace, and on a night where the water bucket is filmed with ice, it's a more than fair deal. The security aspect is less tangible but just as critical. Remember the darkness we talked about? It's not the friendly, muted dark of a modern suburb. It's a deep, profound blackness, filled with noises you can't identify. The hoot of an owl sounds like a ghostly lament. The snap of a twig in the nearby woods could be a fox, or it could be something worse. Lying here, pressed tightly against your kin, you feel a primal sense of safety. The rhythmic breathing of your father, the occasional sigh from your mother, These sounds are a reassurance. You're not alone in the terrifying dark. Your pack is here. Your protectors are an arm's length away. Historians still argue about the precise sleeping arrangements, whether it was organised strictly by age and gender, or if the nightly scrum was a more chaotic affair decided by who fell onto the palliasse first. But the principle of safety in numbers was universal. Now about those other potential bedfellows. On a truly bitter night, one of those nights when the wind howls like a hungry wolf and the frost seems to bite right through the daubed walls, it wasn't unheard of for the most valuable livestock to be brought inside. Not the whole flock, of course, but perhaps a newborn calf, or a piglet who wouldn't survive the night in the lean-to. Tonight, you hear a soft grunt from the corner of the room near the hearth. Your father brought in the sow's weakest piglet. It's a sound that would be utterly alien to a modern bedroom, but to you, it's a comforting sign of pragmatic survival. The piglet gets to live, and its small radiating body adds another tiny furnace to the room. It also adds a certain rustic bouquet to the already complex olfactory tapestry of the room, but that's a small price to pay. This is a quirky tidbit of medieval life that sounds bizarre to us, but it underscores a world where the line between human and animal living space was blurry at best. So you lie there, a human sardine in a can of straw and family. You can feel your sister's hair tickling your cheek. Your brother in a deep sleep has just flung a heavy arm across your chest. You can't move. Attempting to roll over is less a personal decision and more a group project, requiring formal negotiation and collective effort. You can smell the faint scent of sweat, wood smoke and unwashed bodies, but it's not offensive. It's just the smell of home. It's the smell of security. The overwhelming sensation is not one of disgust or claustrophobia, but of a deep, bone-deep sense of belonging. The world outside can be as cold and as frightening as it wants. In here, in this tangled pile of limbs and shared breath, you are safe. You are warm, and against all odds sleep begins to feel possible. Your brother's arm lies heavy as a timber across your ribs. He's deep in the first, heavy slumber of the night, breathing a long, slow rhythm that ends in a faint whistling snore. You try to shift, to ease the pressure, but your movement is telegraphed through the human chain. Your sister mutters something in her sleep. Your mother sighs and adjusts her position, and the whole palliasse rustles like a dry forest floor. You freeze. The simple act of seeking a more comfortable position requires the coordination and consent of 5 other people. It's like trying to turn over on a very small, very crowded lifeboat. You give up and lie still, accepting the dead weight of your brother's arm as a part of the nocturnal landscape. This is the reality that underpins the warmth and security of the communal bed. The utter and complete obliteration of privacy. You have no personal space, not an inch. The modern concept of a personal bubble is a luxury you cannot even conceive of. Your physical world is constantly, inescapably shared. Your breath mingles with your sister's. Your feet are tangled with your grandmother's. Your back is pressed against your mother. Every twitch, every shiver, every involuntary jerk of a dreaming leg is a communal event. The soundtrack to your night is an intimate symphony of bodily functions. Beyond your brother's gentle snoring, you can hear your father grinding his teeth, a faint, gritty sound. Your grandmother lets out a wet, chesty cough that rattles her small frame, and you hope silently that it's not the beginning of the lung sickness that took your neighbour last winter. Someone on the far side of the bed passes gas, a soft puff of air that is simply a fact of life, no more remarkable than a sigh. There are no noise-cancelling headphones, no separate rooms to muffle the sounds of digestion, respiration and discomfort. These are the sounds of your family, as familiar and constant as the wind outside. It's not just the sounds, it's the inability to have a private thought. If you lie awake, your mind racing with the anxieties of the day, a heated word with a friend, the worry of a poor harvest, your restlessness is immediately apparent to everyone. Your tossing and turning disturbs the delicate equilibrium of the bed. Your mother might reach out a hand in the dark, her touch asking a silent question. What's wrong? There is no space to simply be alone with your thoughts. Your internal world is tethered to the external one, and your mood can ripple through the sleeping pile, a contagion of unease. But here's the surprise. The lord and his lady are not alone. While they have the luxury of not sharing their actual mattress with their entire extended family, their sleeping chamber is far from private. A high-status nobleman's life was lived in public, and this extended to the bedroom. Sleeping nearby, on a smaller truckle bed that could be rolled under the main bed during the day, would be a trusted servant or two. A lady's maid, a valet, or even a squire might sleep in the same room. Their job was to be on hand at a moment's notice, to fetch a drink of water, to tend the fire, to help their master or mistress to the chamber pot, or to be ready in case of a nighttime emergency. The chamber pot, by the way, would be a fine ceramic vessel rather than your simple wooden bucket, but the principle remained the same. It was often tucked into a special pot cupboard, or a small built-in closet called a garderobe, which was essentially a toilet that emptied directly down the outside of the castle wall. Charming. Historians still argue about the degree of privacy afforded to the nobility at night. Was the presence of servants so commonplace that they were effectively invisible, their masters able to be intimate without a second thought? Or was true privacy a carefully orchestrated event, with servants dismissed for a short time before being called back? Regardless, the idea of a completely empty, locked bedroom was not the norm. The room was semi-public, a place where business might still be conducted even after the lord had retired. A trusted advisor might be brought in for a late-night conference. The concept of the bedroom as a sacrosanct private sanctuary simply didn't exist. So, as you lie on your rustling straw, you can take some small bitter comfort in this. The lord of the manor may have a feather bed and velvet curtains, but he too is surrounded. He too has his sleep interrupted by the snores and coughs of others. His world is bigger, warmer, and softer than yours, but it is just as lacking in true modern solitude. The peace you both crave is a treasure that money in this age simply cannot buy. As you lie there in your communal human pile, a familiar sensation begins. It starts as a subtle tickle on your calf, so faint you might mistake it for a stray piece of straw, or a trick of your own nerves. You ignore it. But then it comes again, this time a definite, insistent itch on your ribs. You try to scratch it discreetly, a tiny, furtive movement under the heavy wool blanket, but the relief is momentary. Another itch blossoms on your neck, sharp and maddening. You know exactly what this is. The nightly siege has begun. Your unseen bedfellows, the tiny vampires of the medieval world, are awake and hungry. Welcome to the relentless torment of ectoparasites. Fleas, lice, and bedbugs were not just a nuisance in the Middle Ages. They were a fact of life, an unavoidable element of the human condition that transcended class, wealth, and piety. They were a misery shared by peasant. This lack of privacy is a cornerstone of your existence, reflected in the very architecture of your home. The one-room hovel isn't just a sign of poverty, it's a reflection of a communal mindset. The idea of solitude, of shutting a door on the world, was deeply strange to the medieval peasant. Solitude was for hermits, for monks in their cells, for people who had deliberately removed themselves from the fabric of society. For you, life is lived entirely in public, from the fields where you work alongside your neighbours to the church where you worship as a congregation, right down to the straw palliace where you sleep in a tangle of limbs. Privacy as we know it is a modern invention, born from new ideas about the individual and enabled by houses with hallways and separate rooms for sleeping, eating, and living. Imagine having a sharp disagreement with your father during the day. There is no storming off to your room to slam the door. There is no sleeping on the couch. You don't have a couch, and even if you did, it would be 2 feet away from the main bed. Your anger and resentment must be dealt with, or at least suppressed, because in a few hours you will be pressed up against him, sharing a blanket. Historians debate whether this enforced proximity fostered a more resilient, tightly knit family unit, forcing quick resolutions to conflict, or if it simply created a pressure cooker of unspoken grievances and simmering tension. Did you learn to forgive quickly, or did you just learn to be quiet about what angered you? You try to find a small pocket of peace. You close your eyes and focus on your own breathing, a tiny act of internal rebellion. It's in these moments that some of the era's quirky folk traditions might emerge. Perhaps your mother taught you a night spell, a silent prayer or charm to be muttered under your breath. It wouldn't be for grand protection against demons, but a smaller magic. A charm to ward off nightmares, to prevent your brother from kicking in his sleep, or to stop the itch of a flea bite from driving you mad. It's a tiny, secret ritual in a world with no secrets, a way of carving out a mental space no bigger than a whisper. A popular and very real charm involved asking St. Peter to bind the Nix, a type of bedbug demon, a clear case of spiritual pest control. But the spell doesn't seem to be working tonight. Your brother snores on, a fly buzzes somewhere near your ear, and the log pillow is doing terrible things to your neck. You're hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, every smell. The lack of peace is not from an external threat, not from the fear of wolves or bandits. It comes from the inside, from the constant, inescapable and overwhelming presence of other people. Sleep, you realise, is not just a state of unconsciousness. It is a state of peace, and peace requires a degree of solitude you will likely never know. You shift again, just a fraction of an inch, and the whole human ecosystem shifts with you. You finally manage to wiggle into a position that isn't actively painful, wedged between the rhythmic breathing of your siblings. The weight of your brother's arm has shifted, and for a blissful moment there is a kind of equilibrium in your little human nest, as you teeter on the edge of sleep. Your mind, weary as it is, drifts. You think about the lord of the manor, the man to whom your father owes service and a hefty portion of the grain you just harvested. You picture him in his great stone house, a place so vast and imposing it seems more like a fortress than a home. Surely, he must be sleeping peacefully. Surely, he has a soft bed, a warm room, and most luxurious of all, a space all to himself. You are both right and wrong. Let's leave your smoky hovel for a moment and travel up the hill past the church to the manor house. We'll slip like ghosts through the thick stone walls, past the great hall where the lord held court and where his household staff might be sleeping on benches or on the rush-strewn floor. We're headed for the heart of the house, the lord's private chamber, or solar. This is the medieval equivalent of a master suite, a room that served as a private sitting room, an office for managing the estate, and of course, a bedroom. The first thing you'd notice is that it's still cold. Stone walls, for all their strength, are terrible insulators. They absorb the day's chill and radiate it back all night long. The fireplace against one wall is much larger and more ornate than your pathetic hearth, with a proper chimney that draws most, but not all, of the smoke out of the room. A fire would have been kept burning all night by a servant, but the room is still drafty and vast, a far cry from the cosy, centrally heated bedrooms of today. The floor is covered not with packed earth, but with thick, fragrant rushes, maybe mixed with lavender or chamomile to combat mustiness. Still, if you were to part those rushes with your foot, you would find the same mice and other small creatures that plague your own home. Pests were the great social equalizer, and then you see it, dominating the room, the noble's bed. It's a magnificent piece of furniture, a testament to his wealth and status. This is the classic four-poster bed you see in movies. It's a heavy, imposing structure made of carved oak, a small room within a room. But this design isn't just for show, it's a masterclass in medieval climate control. Thick, heavy curtains, often made of wool or even velvet and lined with fur, hang from all four sides. When drawn, these curtains create a sealed-off microenvironment, trapping the occupants' body heat and shielding them from the drafts that swirl through the rest of the chamber. It's the same principle as your family huddle, but executed with expensive fabrics instead of siblings. Inside this curtained cocoon, the mattress is a world away from your lumpy straw palliasse. The sack, or tick, would be made of fine linen, and its contents would be a revelation. Instead of straw, it's stuffed with clouds of soft feathers, goose or duck down being the most prized, or sometimes layers of wool flocking. This would be ludicrously, unimaginably comfortable to you. Atop this, fine linen sheets and multiple woolen blankets, perhaps even a coverlet of silk or embroidered fabric. The pillows, plural, are also stuffed with down. It is, by the standards of the age, a paradise of sleep. A famous historical fact is the Great Bed of War, a massive Elizabethan four-poster bed built around 1590 that was said to be able to sleep four couples at once. While from a slightly later period, it speaks to a long-standing tradition of large, important beds, priest and prince alike. Your straw palliasse is a thriving metropolis for these creatures, but even the great lord's feather bed, which we just visited, was no sanctuary. The warmth of a living body was all the invitation they needed. Let's start with the fleas. Pallets irritans. The human flea is a marvel of evolutionary design. A tiny, wingless, reddish-brown insect, it can leap astonishing distances relative to its size, making it an expert at finding a host. It thrives in bedding, in the dusty floors of homes and in the fur of animals, like that piglet currently grunting in the corner. As you lie still, your body heat is a beacon, drawing them out from the depths of the straw. They scurry through the coarse fabric of your tunic, their tiny claws gripping the threads, searching for a patch of exposed skin. When they find it, they bite, injecting saliva that prevents clotting and allows them to feast on your blood. It's this saliva that causes the intense localized itch. You scratch one bite, and in the process, you probably miss the 2 new ones that have just appeared on your ankle. Then there are the lice. Unlike fleas, which hop on and off their hosts, lice are permanent residents. There are 2 main types making your life miserable: body lice and head lice. Head lice, as their name suggests, live in the hair on your head, gluing their eggs, or nits, to the hair shafts. The constant low-grade itch on your scalp is their handiwork. Body lice are even more insidious. They live in the seams of your clothing, the one set of clothes you likely wear day and night. At night, they crawl from the fabric onto your skin to feed, then retreat back to the safety of the seams. Since you rarely, if ever, wash your clothes with hot water, and you sleep in them, you are essentially providing a 24/7 mobile home and buffet for a thriving colony of lice. Finally, the bedbugs. These flat, oval-shaped insects are the ninjas of the nocturnal parasite world. They are experts at hiding in cracks and crevices, in the timber frame of a noble's bed, in the wattle and daub walls of your hovel, and most definitely within your palliasse. They are photophobic, meaning they despise light. So, they wait. They wait for the fire to die down, for the room to be plunged into darkness, and for you to fall into a deep, still sleep. Then they emerge, drawn by the carbon dioxide you exhale and the heat you radiate. They bite, often in a telltale line or a cluster, and are long gone back to their hiding places by the time you wake up scratching. Fighting this multi-front war was a losing battle. A mainstream historical fact is that personal hygiene was, by our standards, rudimentary. Soap was a luxury item, often made with harsh lye and animal fat, and used more for laundry than for bodies. Bathing was an infrequent and often complicated affair, but it's a myth that medieval people were universally filthy and never washed. Many towns had public bathhouses or stews, though these often gained a reputation for being fronts for brothels. People did wash their hands and faces daily, but this was not enough to defeat the parasites. You might try some folk remedies. A popular, if quirky, tidbit is the use of a louse house, a small hollowed-out piece of wood or bone filled with honey or blood and worn around the neck. The idea was that the lice would be attracted to this trap, which could then be removed and cleaned out. Did it work? Probably not very well. Fine-toothed combs, meticulously carved from... Suddenly, a bolder mouse, or perhaps a young rat, darts out into the centre of the room, a tiny fleeting silhouette against the dying orange glow of the embers. It freezes for a second, sniffing the air, its whiskers twitching. Then, with another burst of speed, it vanishes into the darkness on the other side of the room. Your heart, which had seized in your chest, starts beating again. It was just a mouse, but its brief appearance is a stark reminder of the other life that shares your home, the life that thrives on your scraps and in your shadows. They are a constant presence, a symbol of the decay and disease that nibble at the edges of your existence. Lying here, you're acutely aware that your hovel is not a sealed fortress against nature. It is a porous, permeable shelter, and you are just one of the many creatures taking refuge within its walls tonight. And not all of them are welcome. The scuttling sound of the rat fades into the background noise of the night, a familiar horror that you force your mind to ignore. You pull the scratchy woolen blanket tighter around your shoulders, a flimsy shield against the unseen world. But a new enemy is making its presence felt, one that no blanket can truly defeat. The cold. Not the gentle, refreshing coolness of a modern air-conditioned room, but a deep, penetrating and utterly merciless winter chill. When you first lay down, the residual heat from the central fire and the combined warmth of your family huddle kept the worst of it at bay. But the fire is now little more than a pile of grey ash, with a few pinpricks of defiant orange at its core. It no longer radiates any meaningful heat. The thermal dynamics of your small home have inverted. The stone-cold earth beneath you and the thin wattle and daub walls are now actively leaching warmth from the room and from your body. You can feel it as a physical presence. A draught snakes its way through a crack in the wall near your head, a persistent whisper of frigid air against your cheek. You try to shift, tucking your head down, but the draft finds the back of your neck. Your feet, at the periphery of the family huddle and tangled in the thinnest part of the blanket, feel like blocks of ice. You curl your toes, trying to generate a spark of warmth, but it's a futile effort. The cold is winning. This is the deep, biting cold of a medieval winter night, a cold that people in the modern, centrally heated world can scarcely comprehend. There is no thermostat to adjust, no furnace to kick on, no electric blanket to provide a steady artificial summer. Your survival through the night depends entirely on a few very primitive principles: insulation, conservation, and shared body heat. Your clothes, the same tunic and breeches you wore all day, provide a thin layer of insulation. The straw palliasse insulates you from the frozen ground. The shared blanket and the bodies of your family are the only active heat sources. It is a precarious balance. The very air you breathe tastes of the cold. With each inhalation, your lungs feel the sharp sting of it. When you exhale, you can see your breath plume in the dark, a ghostly cloud illuminated for a second by the faint moonlight slanting through a gap in the door. You are essentially living. Bone, wood, or ivory have been found in archaeological digs across Europe. These were the primary weapon against head lice, used to painstakingly comb out the nits and adult insects. For the wealthy, this would be a daily ritual performed by a servant. For you, it's a task you and your sister perform for each other in the slivers of daylight you have to spare. The church had its own take on the matter. Parasites were often seen as a form of divine punishment for sin, a constant, itchy reminder of humanity's fallen state. Some of the more ascetic saints were said to be proud of their infestations, viewing the mortification of the flesh by lice as a holy trial. St. Thomas Becket, the famous Archbishop of Canterbury, was found after his assassination in 1170 to be wearing a hair shirt that was absolutely crawling with lice, a sign of his extreme piety. The monks who prepared his body were reportedly horrified and impressed in equal measure. Historians still argue whether medieval people ever became accustomed to the constant itching, or if it was a source of perpetual low-level misery that frayed nerves and ruined sleep. Did their skin become desensitized, or did they simply learn a stoic resignation, accepting it as part of the human burden? Lying here in the dark, furiously trying not to scratch and wake everyone up, you'd probably argue for the latter. The itching is a distraction, a torment, a physical manifestation of the dirt and discomfort of your world. It's another layer of difficulty piled onto the already impossible task of getting a good night's rest. Sleep is supposed to be an escape, but tonight, it just feels like you're the main course at a microscopic banquet. The maddening itch of a flea bite under your earlobe finally forces a more violent, less discreet scratch. The sudden movement jostles your sister, who kicks out in her sleep, and the whole delicate truce of the bed is momentarily broken. As you settle back down, trying to will the itching to stop, another sound cuts through the familiar symphony of snores and coughs. It's not the wind, and it's not the settling of the house. It's a sound from within the room, a soft, dry, rapid-fire, skittering sound. It stops, then starts again, closer this time. Your body tenses. This is the sound of the other nocturnal pests, the ones with whiskers and long naked tails, rats and mice. They are as much a part of your household as your grandmother or the family piglet. They are the shadow dwellers, the gleaners of dropped crumbs and spilled grain, the unwelcome furry tenants who pay no rent and show no respect. The battle against them is constant, and it is a battle you are losing. In the daylight, you see the evidence of their nightly rampages: tiny black droppings in the corner where the grain sacks are kept, a gnawed hole in a precious leather pouch, the faint ammonia-like smell of their presence that subtly permeates the entire hovel. But at night, in the dark, they are emboldened. The blackness is their kingdom. The skittering you hear is likely a house mouse, small and relatively timid, darting from the cover of the wall to the hearth, hoping to find a morsel of food you might have dropped during your meagre evening meal. You pray it's just a mouse. Light of dawn promises the chance to rekindle the fire and begin the struggle all over again. The cold is a physical weight, pressing down on you, and all you can do is wait for it to lift. You've survived the long frozen siege of the winter night, and in the cyclical way of the world the seasons have turned. The bone-deep chill has been replaced by a new, but equally oppressive nightly challenge. Tonight, You're trying to sleep in the suffocating grip of a high summer heat wave. The air in your one-room hovel is thick, heavy, and absolutely still. The sun, which beat down on you all day in the fields, has baked the wattle and daub walls and the thatched roof, turning your small home into a convection oven. Now, hours after sunset, those same walls are radiating the heat back into the room. The fire pit is, of course, cold and black. The last thing anyone would do is introduce another source of heat into this stifling environment. But its absence makes no difference. The air is a hot, wet blanket you can't throw off. You're slick with a layer of sweat that won't evaporate in the humid air. Your simple linen tunic, the lightest garment you own, is stuck to your skin, feeling clammy and suffocating. You're lying on the straw palliasse, but the family cuddle that was a life-saving furnace in winter is now a form of torture. The body heat of your 5 family members is unbearable. Every point of contact is a source of slick, sticky misery. Your brother, flung out in a desperate attempt to find a cooler patch of straw, has one leg thrown over yours, and it feels like a branding iron. You try to wriggle away, creating a tiny gap of air between you, and the momentary relief is so profound it's almost dizzying. But the space is quickly closed as someone else shifts, and you're back in the human furnace. The shared woolen blanket, your winter lifeline, is now a despised enemy, kicked down to the foot of the bed in a crumpled, insulating heap. The very air is hard to breathe. It's thick with the familiar smells of wood smoke, unwashed bodies, and the piglet, now a respectable-sized shoat in the corner. But the heat has amplified them, making them ripe and overwhelming. The air is stagnant. There is no concept of cross-ventilation in a house, with only one door and maybe a single, small, unglazed window covered by a wooden shutter. Opening that shutter is a desperate gamble. It might let in a faint, fleeting breeze, but it also invites in the evening's plague of mosquitoes and other flying insects drawn by the scent of warm bodies. Tonight the gamble has been lost. The shutter is open, no breeze has materialised, and a low, whining hum near your ear signals that the mosquitoes have found the buffet. You slap at your neck, the sound sharp in the still air. This is the flip side of the seasonal coin, the oppressive, inescapable heat of a medieval summer. Without electric fans, air conditioning, or even the simple relief of a cold shower on demand, enduring a heat wave was a serious physical challenge. A mainstream historical fact is that dehydration and heat stroke were real and frequent killers, especially among the very young, the elderly, and those performing hard manual labour in the fields, which is to say, almost, inside a refrigerator, and sleep is a desperate strategy to conserve calories and wait for the sun, the ultimate source of all life and warmth, to return. A mainstream historical fact of this era is the medieval warm period, a time of unusually mild climates in Europe that lasted from roughly 950 to 1250 AD. But your life falls in the period that followed, the beginning of what climatologists call the Little Ice Age. From around 1300 onwards, average temperatures began to drop. Winters became longer and more severe, and summers cooler and wetter. This had catastrophic consequences: crop failures, famines, and a general increase in the hardship of daily life. The cold you are feeling is not just a personal discomfort, it's a historical force, a climatic shift that is making survival for you and your family demonstrably harder than it was for your ancestors a few generations ago. In the dead of winter, the battle against the cold was a matter of life and death. The primary source of fuel for your fire is wood, which you and your siblings would have spent countless hours gathering from the surrounding forests. The right to gather wood, known as a stover, was a crucial part of a peasant's customary rights, but it was often restricted. You couldn't just chop down any tree you liked. You were typically allowed to gather fallen branches or wood you could pull down with a shepherd's crook, hence the phrase by hook or by crook. This meant that fuel was a precious, carefully rationed commodity. You would never dream of keeping a large fire burning all night. That would be a foolish waste of a resource you'll desperately need tomorrow. So the fire is banked, covered with ash to preserve the embers until morning, and the cold is allowed to take over the night. To combat this, people developed some quirky, desperate strategies. One such tidbit is the bed warmer. This was a long-handled metal pan, usually copper or brass with a hinged lid. Before bedtime, it would be filled with hot coals from the fire. A servant, or in your case your mother, would then run the pan between the sheets, if you had them, or just through the straw of the palliasse to pre-warm the bed. It was a momentary burst of glorious heat, but one fraught with danger. A clumsy hand could easily spill a hot coal, setting the highly flammable straw bedding ablaze in an instant. Historians still argue about the extent of seasonal affective disorder in the Middle Ages. Did the long, dark, bitterly cold winters, combined with a poorer diet, lead to widespread depression and despair? Written records from the period rarely speak of emotions in such modern terms, but they are filled with prayers begging for deliverance from the harshness of winter. They speak of the Wolf Month, the time in deep winter when food stores were low and the cold was at its most ferocious. You lie still, trying to make yourself as small as possible, to minimise the surface area of your body exposed to the cold. Your shivering is no longer a conscious reaction. It's an involuntary, full-body tremor. Your muscles desperately trying to generate heat. Your thoughts become slow and sluggish. Your anxieties about fleas and rats replaced by a single, overwhelming desire for warmth. Sleep in this context is not a gentle drift into dreamland. It is a surrender. It is a form of hibernation, a shutting down of the system to endure the long frozen hours until the first grey. The real fear is the rat, specifically the black rat. Rattus rattus. This creature, a notorious historical stowaway, arrived in Europe on Roman trading ships and has been a fixture of human settlements ever since. It's larger, bolder and far more destructive than its smaller murine cousin. A black rat can chew through wood, leather and even soft metals. It is an agile climber, which is how it gets into your thatched roof, joining the ecosystem of insects we've already discussed. You hear a louder scratching sound from above and you know they are up there, running their nightly races in the straw, just inches above your head. You pull the woolen blanket a little higher, tucking it under your chin. The fear is not just of the creature itself, but of what it represents. Rats are a direct threat to your survival. The grain you have stored in sacks represents weeks of back-breaking labour. It is your food for the coming winter. A family of rats can decimate that store in a remarkably short time, fouling what they don't eat with their urine and droppings. Their constant gnawing can damage the structure of your house, your tools, and your few possessions. They are agents of decay and loss, and of course they are harbingers of disease. While the direct link between rats, their fleas, and the Black Death wouldn't be scientifically understood for another 500 years, a deep instinctual revulsion and fear of these animals was ingrained in the medieval psyche. A mainstream historical fact is that the plague, caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis and carried by the fleas that infested black rats, swept through Europe in the mid-14th century, wiping out an estimated 30% to 60% of the population. Even if you live in a time before or after the Great Pestilence, smaller, more localised outbreaks of plague and other rodent-borne diseases like typhus were a constant threat. People may not have known the precise mechanism of transmission, but they knew that where there were rats, death often followed. Your family's primary defence against this scourge is a scrawny, yellow-eyed cat. She's not a pampered pet. She's a working animal, a furry killing machine whose sole purpose is to keep the rodent population in check. She earns her keep not with cuddles, but with the small furry corpses she sometimes leaves near the hearth as a grim offering. You haven't seen her tonight, and you hope she's out on the hunt. The sound of a cat and rat skirmish in the middle of the night, a sudden shriek and a frantic scrabbling, is a terrifying but ultimately reassuring sound. It means your guard is on duty. A quirky and rather unpleasant tidbit of medieval life is the sheer number of folk remedies and magical charms aimed at ridding a house of rats. These ranged from the practical, leaving out dishes of water to drown them, to the bizarre. One popular charm involved writing a threatening letter to the rats, addressing them as if they were intelligent beings, and ordering them to leave the premises at once or face dire, supernatural consequences. This letter would then be rolled up and stuffed into a rat hole. Historians still argue about whether people genuinely believed this would work, or if it was simply an act of profound desperation, a way of feeling some agency in the face of an overwhelming infestation. You can just imagine your father, weary and fed up, painstakingly scrawling a tiny eviction notice to Sir Rat and his damnable kin, everyone in your world. Water, pulled from a local well or stream, was often lukewarm and not always clean. The idea of a cold, refreshing drink was a fantasy. Your only relief is the damp cloth your mother soaked in well water before bedtime. You press it to your forehead, your neck, the insides of your wrists. The coolness is a shock, a moment of pure, unadulterated bliss. but the effect is heartbreakingly temporary. Within a minute, your own body heat has warmed the cloth, and it's just a wet, clammy rag. Still, you repeat the process, cherishing those few seconds of relief. People sought relief in some quirky and sometimes ineffective ways. One tidbit from medieval health manuals, which were often based on the ancient Greek theory of the four humours, was to eat cooling foods. Things like cucumbers, melons and lettuce were considered to be cold and moist in nature, and therefore good for balancing the body's humours during hot weather. You might have had a simple supper of bread and greens partly for this reason. Some medical texts even suggested applying sliced lettuce leaves to the forehead as a poultice to induce sleep on a hot night. You can just picture yourself lying there, a human salad, hoping for a bit of shut-eye. As you lie sweating in the dark, you might think of the nobility again. Surely their stone castles were cooler. Yes and no. The thick stone walls that were so terrible at keeping heat in during the winter were, conversely, very good at keeping heat out during the day. A thick-walled castle or manor house would remain significantly cooler than your flimsy hovel, but they were not immune. With their small windows and lack of air circulation, they could become stuffy and stagnant as well. The wealthy had other tricks, of course. They might have their servants hang wet tapestries or sheets in the doorways to cool the air by evaporation. They would drink wine chilled in the deepest cellars, and in the most extreme heat, the entire court might move. The annual royal progress, where a monarch and their retinue would travel from castle to castle, was partly a way to allow the castle's primitive sanitation systems to be cleaned out, but it was also a way to escape the summer stench and heat of the city for the greener, breezier countryside. Historians still argue about how much the built environment was intentionally designed to combat heat. Were the high ceilings of great halls and cathedrals purely for aesthetic grandeur, or were they also a clever passive form of air conditioning, allowing hot air to rise far above the occupants? Was the orientation of a house on its plot of land carefully considered to minimise solar gain in the summer? For the peasants, such considerations were a luxury they couldn't afford. Your house was built where it was allowed, with the materials available. The night drags on. Sleep is impossible. You doze in short, fitful bursts, waking every few minutes to a new mosquito bite or the discomfort of your own sweat. The absolute stillness of the air feels like a physical weight. You fantasize about a cool breeze, a sudden rain shower, anything to break the spell of the heat. But there is nothing. Just the dark, the heat, the whine of insects, and the sticky presence of your family. It's a different kind of misery from the winter's cold, but it's misery all the same. Whether frozen or baked, a peaceful night's sleep in this world seems to be the rarest of treasures. You've managed to escape the sweltering heat of your family's huddle for a night. Perhaps your father found you a temporary apprenticeship with a cousin in the nearby town, a bustling settlement of a few thousand souls packed tightly behind a defensive stone wall. You imagine a better night's sleep, away from the familiar discomforts of home. But as darkness falls on the town, you realise you've only traded one set of sleep-destroying problems for another, entirely different cacophony. You're now trying to sleep on a small straw pallet, not on the packed earth floor of your hovel, but on the rough wooden floor of an upstairs room in a crowded timber-framed house. The room is still hot and stuffy, but the real enemy tonight is not the temperature, it's the noise. The city at night is not a place of peaceful slumber. It is a living, breathing, groaning and shouting organism that refuses to go quietly to bed. Your room overlooks a narrow, unpaved street, and the wooden shutter on the window is open a crack to catch any stray breeze. This crack also serves as a perfect conduit for every sound the city has to offer. The first thing you hear is the relentless ringing of bells. Church bells governed the rhythm of medieval life, a practice known as the canonical hours. Even at night the bells ring out, marking the services of vespers, evening, compline, nightfall, and, most disruptively, matins and lauds in the pitch-black hours before dawn. The tolling of the great bronze bell from the main church is a deep, resonant sound that seems to vibrate in your very bones, a constant reminder of God's time, which pays no heed to your desire for sleep. Then there is the human noise. Directly below your window is a tavern. While a civic curfew, often announced by another bell, requires establishments to close their doors around 8 or 9 p.m, that rarely stops the activity inside. You can hear the muffled roar of drunken laughter, the rhythmic pounding of a fist on a table to emphasise a point, and then, inevitably, the sharp, angry shouts that signal a disagreement. The argument spills out into the street. You hear the slurred insults, the scuffling of feet, and the meaty thud of a punch landing, followed by a groan. A few minutes later, a woman's voice, sharp with fury, shouts at them all to shut their mouths and let honest folk sleep. Her plea is answered with a fresh round of curses. It's better than evening theatre, but not exactly a lullaby. Suddenly, a new sound cuts through the din, a loud cry from the end of the street. All's well, and the hour is 10. It's the town watchman. This is a mainstream historical fact of urban life. A patrol of men, often armed with a poleaxe and a lantern, walked the streets at night. Their job was to act as a deterrent to crime, to watch for the first signs of fire and to enforce the curfew. Their hourly cries, meant to be reassuring, are just another layer in the nocturnal symphony. You hear his heavy booted footsteps receding down the cobblestones, his voice fading as he turns a corner. The brief lull is immediately filled by the barking of a dog, set off by his passing. The animal sounds are a constant chaotic chorus. Unlike modern cities, medieval towns were filled with livestock. The butcher down the street has pigs in a pen behind his shop, and one of them is squealing with an unholy persistence. A rooster, hopelessly confused by the lantern of the watchman, lets out a premature crow, setting off a chain reaction of confused cock-a-doodle-doos from a dozen other coops across the neighbourhood. You hear the braying of a donkey, the lowing of a cow kept in a small backyard dairy, and the ever-present skittering of rats in the walls and alleys. And then there's the smell, which is intrinsically linked to the sounds. The door opens below, and you hear the slosh and splatter of a chamber pot being emptied directly into the central gutter of the street. The stench, a pungent wave of ammonia and human waste, wafts up and in through your window. You gag and pull your thin blanket over your nose. This practice, though officially discouraged, was commonplace. The central drainage channel or kennel in the middle of the street was an open sewer, and the night was the prime time for garde l'eau, a cry derived from the French garde l'eau, watch out for the water, which was supposed to warn passers-by of the imminent deluge from above. A quirky tidbit of urban nightlife was the existence of rakers, or gong farmers, the municipal employees tasked with the deeply unpleasant job of cleaning out public latrines and cesspits. This work was so foul-smelling that it was legally required to be done only at night. The sound of their shovels and the creaking of their cart, the night soil cart, was another unique element of the city's nocturnal soundscape. Historians still argue about the effectiveness of the night watch. Were they a genuine police force, maintaining order and preventing crime? Or were they often just a handful of poorly paid, frequently drunk citizens going through the motions, their loud cries serving more to warn criminals of their approach than to catch them? Whatever the reality, their presence adds to the sense that the city is not truly asleep. It is merely resting, its various functions, drunken revelry, law enforcement, sanitation, prayer, continuing in shifts throughout the night. You lie on your pallet, a world away from the deep, dark silence of your country hovel. There, the sounds were of nature, wind, owls, the rustle of unseen animals. Here, the sounds are entirely human, a relentless, chaotic, and often aggressive testament to thousands of people living cheek by jowl. The city pulses with a nervous energy that doesn't cease with the setting of the sun. Every shout, every bell, every squealing pig is a reminder that you are at the heart of a complex, noisy machine. Sleep doesn't come easily here. You don't drift off. You collapse from sheer exhaustion, your brain finally surrendering to the overwhelming sensory input. The cry of the watchman comes again. All's well, and the hour is 11. And you wonder how anything can possibly be well in this endless, sleepless racket. The chaotic noise of the town is a distant memory. Your brief apprenticeship is over, and you're back home, lying on your familiar straw palliasse, surrounded by the warm, breathing bodies of your family. The drunken shouts and tolling bells have been replaced by a silence so deep it feels like a physical pressure on your eardrums. After the relentless racket of the city, this should be a relief, a welcome blanket of peace. But it isn't. The silence of the medieval countryside at night is not peaceful. It's terrifying. Here, far from the town's walls and the reassuring hourly cries of the watchman, the darkness is absolute. On a moonless, overcast night, you can't see your hand in front of your face, The world outside your thin wattle and daub walls has ceased to exist, swallowed by a blackness so profound it feels primal, biblical. This is not the muted darkness of the modern world, softened by the ambient glow of streetlights and distant cities. This is a perfect, ink-black void. And in this void, every tiny sound is magnified, distorted by your imagination into something monstrous. You lie perfectly still, your ears straining to interpret the night's cryptic language. The first sound you notice is the wind. It's not the simple howl of a winter storm, it's a subtler sound, a low, mournful sigh as it moves through the branches of the trees in the small woodlot behind your hovel. It makes the trees creak and groan like old men with aching bones. Is it just the wind, or is it something else, something moving through the woods trying to be quiet? Your mind, steeped in folklore and fireside stories, immediately populates the darkness with possibilities. Then comes a sound that makes the hair on your arm stand up, a long, high-pitched scream, followed by a series of frantic, bubbling noises. Your heart leaps into your throat. For a terrifying second, it sounds like a person in mortal agony. But then your rational mind, the part of you that knows this land, identifies it. A rabbit, caught by a fox. It is a sound of pure, unadulterated terror and pain, a stark reminder of the brutal, unsentimental violence that is a constant part of the natural world just beyond your door. You're safe in your hovel, a fox poses no threat to you, but the sound is a visceral broadcast of a death happening just a few hundred feet away. The silence that follows is even worse. You're now hyper-aware of the wildness of your surroundings. The forest, a place of wood gathering and foraging by day, transforms at night into a mysterious and threatening kingdom. This is a mainstream historical fact. The medieval worldview was thick with superstition and a belief in the supernatural. The woods were not just trees and animals. They were the domain of fairies, sprites, goblins, and worse things. People genuinely believed that demonic entities and restless spirits roamed the night, especially in wild, untamed places. The church reinforced this, teaching that the darkness was the devil's playground. You hear the hoot of an owl, a classic nocturnal sound. But it's not the gentle, familiar hoo-hoo you might imagine. A barn owl's call is a long, eerie shriek that can easily be mistaken for a ghost's wail. A tawny owl's call is a quavering hoo-hoo-hoo that sounds like a lonely, questioning spirit. These are the sounds that give birth to legends of the banshee. Lying in your bed, you know it's just an owl. Probably. But a small, primal part of your brain isn't so sure. The quirky tidbit that highlights this deep-seated fear is the concept of the nightmare itself. To us, a nightmare is just a bad dream. But in the medieval mind, the nightmare, from the Old English mare, was a literal demonic entity, a goblin or succubus that would sit on a sleeper's chest, causing feelings of suffocation, paralysis, and terrifying visions. This is now understood to be a perfect folkloric explanation for the phenomenon of sleep paralysis. But for you, lying here with your heart pounding, the idea that a malevolent creature could be responsible for bad dreams feels frighteningly plausible. You might unconsciously make the sign of the cross under your blanket, a small act of faith against the things that go bump in the night. Historians still argue about how much the common peasant genuinely believed these supernatural tales, versus how much they were just a form of entertainment, or a way to explain natural phenomena. Was the story of a water kelpie that drowned careless travellers a genuine belief? Or was it a practical cautionary tale to keep children away from dangerous rivers? Regardless of its origin, the fear it generated was very real. The line between the natural and the supernatural was blurry, and the night was when that line was most likely to be crossed. A sudden, sharp snap from just outside the door makes you jump. It's the sound of a heavy twig breaking. Your mind races. Is it a deer wandering too close to the house? Is it your neighbour's cow, which has gotten loose from its pen again? Or is it a person? A beggar? A vagrant? Or worse, a thief? Drawn by the faint hope that you might have something worth stealing. You hold your breath, listening. You hear nothing but the wind and the steady breathing of your family. After what feels like an eternity, you decide it was probably just a branch falling from a tree. Probably. This is the tyranny of the country silence. In the city, the dangers were human and identifiable. A drunkard, a thief, a fire. The noise, while overwhelming, was a sign of life, of community, of a shared human world. Here the silence is a blank canvas onto which you project all your deepest fears. Fear of the unknown, fear of the wild, fear of the supernatural. The silence is not empty. It's full of terrible possibilities. You find yourself almost longing for the simple, honest racket of the town. At least there, the monsters had names and faces. Here, they are nameless, and they live in the all-consuming dark. You manage to push the formless fears of the dark woods from your mind, focusing instead on the small, familiar sounds within your hovel. The soft snores of your father, the rustle of the straw as your sister shifts, the distant gentle grunting of the pig. You try to anchor yourself to these domestic realities, but as you lie there, another sensory assault begins its slow. Floor, rushes mixed with lavender, chamomile, or meadow sweet, was common in wealthier homes. For you, such luxuries are rare. Maybe in high summer, your mother would gather some herbs, but their pleasant fragrance would be a fleeting victory against the tide of organic odours. A mainstream historical fact is that our modern obsession with deodorization and sanitation is a very recent development, largely a product of the 19th and 20th centuries and the germ theory of disease. Medieval people simply lived with a level of ambient stench that would be shocking to a modern nose. They had a much higher tolerance for smells that we would consider foul, but that doesn't mean they didn't notice them. Medieval literature is full of references to bad smells, usually associated with sin, corruption, and disease, the stench of death, while pleasant smells, like incense in a church or flowers in a garden, were associated with purity, holiness, and paradise. So, while your nose is more accustomed to this environment than a modern person's would be, it doesn't mean you are immune. The smell of the chamber pot is still unpleasant. The thick, greasy smell of the blanket is still suffocating. Historians still argue about the psychological impact of living in such an olfactory-rich environment. Did it contribute to a general sense of malaise and filth? Or was it so normal that it was completely filtered out of conscious thought? Lying here, you'd probably say it's somewhere in between. Most of the time, you don't notice it. But in the quiet, still moments of the night, when there are no other distractions, the wall of smell can feel solid and overwhelming. You try to take a deep breath, and you get a full-spectrum sample of your world, a base note of damp earth and human waste, a mid-note of stale sweat and musty straw, and a top note of pig with a hint of wood smoke from the rafters. This is the air you have to breathe until morning. It's a potent, inescapable reminder of the messy, organic and crowded reality of your life. Sleep requires you to shut down your senses, but tonight the sense of smell is staging a full-scale rebellion. You bury your face in the crook of your arm, hoping to find a small pocket of less offensive air, and wait for unconsciousness to grant you a temporary escape. The overwhelming world of smells finally begins to recede as your mind grows heavy with fatigue. You're on the verge of sleep, that blessed state of oblivion, when a new torment surfaces, rising from within your own body. It starts as a dull, throbbing ache deep in your jaw. You try to ignore it, shifting your head on the hard log pillow, but the movement sends a sharp electric jolt of pain through the side of your face. It's your tooth. The one that's been grumbling for weeks, a molar with a deep black cavity, has chosen the dead of night to erupt into a full-blown rebellion. This is sickness in the Middle Ages, not a grand, sweeping plague, but the mundane, grinding misery of everyday ailments for which you have no remedy. The throbbing in your jaw is now a relentless, pulsing beat that seems to sync with your own frantic heartbeat. The pain is so inexorable, creep into your consciousness. It's not a sound, and it's not a feeling. It's the smell, or rather, the smells. A whole complex, layered and inescapable world of odours that you must breathe all night long. During the day, with the door open and the breeze, however slight, circulating, the various aromas of your life tend to dissipate. But at night, with the door barred and the single window shuttered tight against the real and imagined threats of the dark, your one-room home becomes a sealed container. The air grows stale and thick, a rich soup of smells that tells the entire story of your existence. Let's start with the most immediate and pungent source. Tucked in the corner, not 3 paces from your head, is the chamber pot. In your peasant home, this is likely a simple wooden bucket or perhaps a roughly made ceramic pot. Into this vessel goes all the human waste produced by the 6 people in your family during the night. The concept of an indoor toilet, let alone a separate room for it, is unthinkable, so it sits there in the corner of your single, living, sleeping, eating space. Each time it's used, which is inevitable over the course of 8 hours, a fresh wave of sharp ammoniac odour wafts through the small room. There's no lid, no flush, no air freshener. It's a raw, unavoidable presence. You've learned to breathe shallowly, to try and ignore it, but on a still, warm night, its pungent bouquet is the dominant feature of the nocturnal landscape. Next, you become aware of the smell of your bedmates. This is not the clean soap and shampoo scent of a modern person. This is the smell of a day's hard, sweaty labour in the fields. It's the smell of unwashed bodies, of stale sweat ingrained in the coarse fabric of the tunics you all sleep in. Remember, you don't have separate pyjamas. You sleep in your underlayers of clothing, the same ones you've worn for days. Soap is a luxury, and a full body wash is a rare event. So the air is thick with the sour animal tang of humanity. It's not a stench you find repulsive. It's simply the smell of your family, as familiar as their faces, but it's dense and it clings to the back of your throat. Layered on top of this is the smell of your bed itself. The straw pallius, which we've established is a bustling ecosystem of insects, also has its own distinct perfume. It's the musty, dusty smell of slowly decaying vegetable matter, mixed with the faint, unpleasant odour of mildew from the perpetual dampness of the packed earth floor. The woolen blanket you share has its own aroma too, a greasy, lanolin-rich scent of the sheep it came from, combined with years of absorbed wood smoke and human oils. It's a heavy, cloying smell that you pull right up to your nose every time you try to get warm. Let's not forget the other inhabitants. The piglet or shote in the corner contributes its own earthy, distinctly porcine odour to the mix, and the ever-present rats and mice leave behind their faint but sharp scent of ammonia. Your home is not just a human space, it's a multi-species dwelling, and every species brings its own signature scent to the party. A quirky tidbit of medieval domestic life is that people often tried to combat these smells not by cleaning, which was often futile, but by masking. The practice of strewing sweet-smelling herbs on the intense it radiates up to your temple and down your neck. You press your hand to your cheek, as if the pressure could somehow contain the agony, but it does nothing. In your modern life, this problem would have a clear, multi-step solution. Get out of bed, go to the bathroom and take 2 ibuprofen. The pain would begin to recede in about 20 minutes, and you'd be back to sleep. If the problem persisted, you'd make a dentist appointment for the next day, where the tooth would be filled or extracted under local anaesthesia. For you, lying here in the dark, none of these options exist. There is no ibuprofen, there is no dentist, there is only the pain, raw and unmediated. Your world has no concept of germ theory. Disease, to you, is a mysterious force. It might be a punishment from God for a forgotten sin. It could be an imbalance of the 4 bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, the dominant medical theory of the age, inherited from the ancient Greeks. A toothache might be attributed to an excess of hot or cold humours, or, according to a surprisingly persistent folk belief, it could be caused by a toothworm, a tiny writhing worm that was gnawing away at the inside of your tooth. So what can you do? Your mother, woken by your soft moans of pain, might get up and fumble in the dark for her small pouch of remedies. The options are limited and of dubious efficacy. She might make a poultice of mashed herbs to apply to the outside of your cheek. Perhaps she'll give you a clove to hold against the offending tooth. The eugenol in cloves has a mild anaesthetic property, a rare case of a folk remedy having a genuine, if slight, scientific basis. A more extreme and frankly bizarre remedy recorded in some medieval texts involves finding a frog, spitting into its mouth, and asking it to take the toothache away with it. Desperate people will try desperate things. If the pain becomes truly unbearable over the next few days, you might seek out the local barber surgeon. This is a mainstream historical fact. For most of your period, surgery was not performed by university-trained physicians, who were rare, expensive, and focused on diagnosis and herbal remedies. Minor surgery, bloodletting and tooth-pulling were the domain of barbers. Their sharp razors for shaving made them the logical choice for cutting into flesh, and the red and white striped pole we still see today is said to represent blood and bandages. A visit to the barber surgeon would be a terrifying prospect. There is no anaesthetic. He would sit you in a chair, hold your head steady, and use a brutal-looking pair of iron pliers called a pelican to grip the tooth. Then he would pull, and pull, and twist, until the tooth, or more likely pieces of the tooth, came out. The risk of a broken jaw, massive blood loss, or a subsequent infection that could kill you was very real. This is not a step to be taken lightly, so for tonight, you simply have to endure. The pain is a thief, stealing not just your sleep, but your ability to think. It colonizes your entire consciousness. Every pulse of agony makes you tense your body, which wakes your siblings, who grumble and shift away from your restless torment. You feel a wave of feverish heat wash over you, followed by a clammy, cold sweat. This is the reality for any number of common afflictions. A throbbing headache, the sharp sting of a urinary tract infection, the deep, aching pain of an arthritic joint, the relentless grip of a stomach flu, with its debilitating cramps and repeated miserable trips to the chamber pot in the corner. There is no Pepto-Bismol, no acetaminophen, no antibiotics. You have your body's own immune system, a handful of herbal remedies that may or may not work, and prayer. Historians still argue about the average pain tolerance of medieval people. Did a life of constant physical hardship and smaller, more frequent pains make them tougher and more resilient to agony than we are? Or did the lack of effective analgesics make pain a more terrifying and all-consuming experience? Lying here with fire in your jaw, you would certainly vote for the latter. The pain is not just a symptom. It's an entity, a malevolent presence that has taken up residence inside you. Sleep becomes an impossible dream. Every time you start to drift off, a particularly vicious throb of pain snatches you back to full, agonizing consciousness. You begin to feel a sense of despair. How can you possibly face a full day of labour in the fields tomorrow feeling like this? But you know you have to. There are no sick days in your world. If you don't work, you don't eat. Sickness is not just a physical trial. It's an economic disaster. The night stretches before you, a seemingly endless expanse of time to be filled with nothing but your own suffering. The darkness of the room feels like a reflection of the darkness in your mind, a place where the pain has extinguished all other thoughts. All the other challenges, the cold, the heat, the pests, the smells, were external. This is an enemy from within, and there is nowhere to run. The throbbing in your jaw has, by some small miracle, subsided into a dull, manageable ache. Perhaps the clove your mother gave you offered a brief respite, or maybe the nerve, in an act of mercy, has simply given up for now. Exhaustion, deep and profound, finally begins to reclaim you. Your body feels heavy, your thoughts slow and syrupy. You're sinking finally into the welcome depths of sleep. But just as your consciousness starts to fray at the edges, a new anxiety, sharp and sudden as a spark, ignites in your mind. It's a fear born from the very materials that surround you, the fear of fire. You're sleeping in what is essentially a pile of kindling. Your house is a tinderbox. The walls are woven from dry sticks, the wattle. The roof is a thick, highly flammable thatch of straw or reeds. Your bed is a giant sack of dry straw. The floor, while packed earth, is likely strewn with bits of stray kindling, wood shavings from a mending job and other combustible debris. The only thing in the entire structure that won't burn is the ground itself. The central hearth, now just a bed of embers, was a roaring fire only hours ago. Your father, as he always does, carefully banked the fire for the night. This process involves covering the glowing coals with a thick layer of ash to insulate them, starving them of oxygen so they smoulder slowly without bursting into flame, preserving them to be rekindled in the morning. It's a technique as old as fire itself, practiced by cultures all over the world. But it's not foolproof. What if a small, unnoticed draught from that crack in the wall is, at this very moment, whispering across the embers, coaxing a single, tiny spark back to life? What if that spark, light as a feather, were to lift on the draught and float upwards, landing silently on the dry, waiting thatch of the roof? It would be a tiny, almost invisible marriage of heat and fuel. For a moment, nothing would happen. Then, a small, tentative wisp of smoke, invisible in the darkness. Then, a dull orange glow would begin to spread, not with a roar, but with a hungry, accelerating crackle. You've seen it happen before. You remember waking one night to frantic shouts from down the lane. You and your father tumbled out of your hovel into the cold night air to see the sky lit with a terrifying orange light. Your neighbour's house, the one just 2 doors down, was fully engulfed in a vortex of flame, roaring like a hungry beast. The heat was so intense you could feel it on your face from 100 feet away. There was nothing anyone could do. There is no fire brigade. There is no running water, no hoses. Your neighbours stood by, helpless, watching their entire world, their home, their possessions, their stored food, turn to ash in a matter of minutes. They were lucky to have escaped with their lives. Their pig was not so lucky. You can still remember the sound. This memory is seared into your brain. A mainstream historical fact is that fire was one of the greatest and most constant dangers of medieval life, particularly in the tightly packed timber and thatch environments of both villages and towns. A fire that started in one house could, with a bit of wind, leap from roof to roof, consuming an entire block or even a whole town with terrifying speed. The Great Fire of London in 1666 is the most famous example, but catastrophic fires were a regular feature of urban life throughout the Middle Ages. Lying in the dark, your mind plays out the terrifying sequence of events. The first sign would be the smell, a sharp, acrid scent of smoke that would cut through the usual nocturnal odours. Then the sound, that hungry crackle. By the time you were fully awake and aware of what was happening, you would have seconds to act. Your father's first frantic shouts, the mad scramble to get everyone, your sleeping siblings, your elderly grandmother, out of the hovel and into the safety of the night. There would be no time to save anything. Not the blanket, not the cooking pot, not the precious sacks of grain. Only your lives. To wake up to a fire in a house like this is to wake up to absolute catastrophe. A quirky and rather grim tidbit is the role of the church bell in this. While it marked the hours for prayer, it also served as the town's fire alarm. A frantic, continuous and irregular ringing of the bell was the universal signal for a fire, a sound that would strike terror into the heart of any citizen and call every able-bodied man to grab a bucket and form a human chain from the nearest well or river. In your small village, the alarm would be more primitive, the shouts of your own family. Historians still argue about the true frequency of these devastating house fires. Were they a constant nightly terror that kept people in a state of perpetual anxiety, or were they a more remote, it happens to other people kind of fear? The sheer number of ordinances passed by town councils regarding fire safety, banning thatched roofs in certain areas, requiring brewers and bakers to have extra water on hand, enforcing curfews after which all fires had to be extinguished or banked, suggests the threat was taken very seriously indeed. These were some of the earliest forms of public safety regulation. You strain your senses, sniffing the air. Is that a hint of smoke, or is it just the lingering scent from the banked embers? You listen intently. Is that crackle the sound of fire, or just the house settling? Your mind is playing tricks on you, turning every faint stimulus into a sign of impending disaster. The fear of fire is a deeply rational one, grounded in the physical reality of your flammable world. It's a powerful disincentive to sleep. To sleep is to become vulnerable, to lower your guard, and with a potential inferno just one unlucky spark away. Lowering your guard feels like a foolish, dangerous thing to do. You lie awake, your heart pounding, a self-appointed fire warden for your sleeping family, staring into the darkness and praying that the embers in the hearth behave themselves until morning. The rational fear of a house fire begins to fade as you reassure yourself that the embers are safely banked. The air is clear of smoke, and the night is still. Your mind, however, having tasted anxiety, is not yet ready to let go. It simply moves from one fear to another, from a worldly threat to a spiritual one, from the fire that consumes the body to the fire that consumes the soul. You begin to contemplate the deeper, more profound fear of dying in your sleep. This isn't the abstract philosophical worry of a modern person. This is a specific, terrifying, and theologically detailed fear. According to the teachings of the Church, which form the absolute bedrock of your understanding of the universe, the state of your soul at the moment of death is everything. It is the single most important moment of your existence, the one that determines whether you will spend eternity in the blissful presence of God in heaven or in the unending, unimaginable torment of hell. And what if that moment comes when you are unconscious, unprepared, and unconfessed? You lie on your straw palliasse, and you start to take a mental inventory of your sins. You snapped at your mother yesterday when she asked you to fetch more water. You stole a small wizened apple from the Lord's orchard last week. You had a fleeting, lustful thought about the blacksmith's daughter. You felt a surge of envy towards your friend who has a newer pair of shoes. In the grand scheme of things, these are small, petty sins, but the priest has taught you that even the smallest stain on the soul, if left unconfessed and unabsolved, is a mark of imperfection that displeases God. You try to perform a mental act of contrition, to feel truly sorry for your small transgressions. You promise God you will be better tomorrow, that you will not be so quick to anger or envy. It's a desperate, silent negotiation conducted in the dark, an attempt to spiritually prepare yourself just in case. The irony is bitter. The very act of seeking the peaceful oblivion of sleep is triggering a profound fear of eternal oblivion. The darkness of the room no longer feels neutral. It feels charged, menacing, a space where the veil between the living world and the spiritual one is thin. Every creak of the house, every hoot of the owl, which earlier you feared as a physical threat, now seems like a potential omen, a message from the other side. Sleep is a surrender, a small rehearsal for death. And tonight, you're not at all sure you're ready for the performance. Your heart pounds not with the fear of fire, but with the fear of hellfire, and you begin to wonder if you will ever feel truly safe enough to close your eyes. The terror of hellfire eventually exhausts itself. The human mind can only maintain such a high pitch of anxiety for so long before fatigue, that great physiological imperative, begins to assert its dominance once more. Your catalogue of sins is complete, your silent prayers have been offered, and your body's need for rest finally outweighs your soul's fear of damnation. The hard log pillow feels at last like a comfort. The scratchy wool of the blanket feels like a shield. You close your eyes, and this time you fall. You fall into the deep, dreamless, and profoundly heavy sleep of the utterly exhausted. This is not, however, the beginning of a full 8-hour stretch of uninterrupted rest. What you're experiencing is something that has been almost entirely lost to the modern world, a pattern of slumber that was, for centuries, the norm. You've just entered what sleep historians call first sleep, or first slumber. This was not a conscious choice, but a natural biological rhythm, deeply ingrained and dictated by the setting of the sun. In a world without artificial light, the day ends when the light ends. After your meagre evening meal, and with the few chores that could be done by firelight completed, there was little else to do but go to bed. This meant that in the winter you might be in bed as early as 7 or 8 p.m. Your body, bone-weary from a day of physical labour, craved rest, and it plunged into it with an intensity born of necessity. First sleep was typically the deepest and most restorative phase of the night's rest. It would last for roughly 3 to 4 hours. During this time, you're almost completely dead to the world. The skittering of a mouse, the shifting of a sibling, the distant hoot of an owl, none of it registers. Your body is in full repair mode, healing the microscopic tears in your muscles, consolidating memories, what few pleasant ones there might be, and replenishing its stores of night became a time for socializing and entertainment, and the idea of a productive, waking watch was replaced by a modern obsession with achieving a solid, efficient 8 hours. But here, in the pre-industrial dark, that modern pressure doesn't exist. You have surfaced from your first sleep feeling not groggy or anxious, but strangely refreshed and clear-headed. The agonizing pains, fears, and discomforts of the evening have been washed away by that first deep slumber. The night is no longer an enemy to be endured, but a quiet, calm space. You are awake in the heart of the darkness, and the world is still. And you're not worried, because you know that in an hour or so you will simply lie back down, close your eyes, and enter your second sleep. You lie awake in the profound stillness that follows your first sleep. The rest of your family is still deep in their own slumber, a chorus of soft, rhythmic breathing that fills the small hovel. The throbbing of your tooth has vanished, the fears of fire and damnation have receded, and the initial deep fatigue of your body has been slaked. You feel a strange sense of clarity, a calm alertness that is unique to this specific time of night. This is the waking watch, a quiet interlude of consciousness carved out of the heart of the darkness. For a modern person, this state would be a source of anxiety, labelled as middle-of-the-night insomnia. You'd be glancing at the clock, calculating how many hours are left until you have to get up, and fretting about how tired you'll be tomorrow, but you have no clock. Your sense of time is governed by the position of the stars, the crowing of the rooster, and the slow internal rhythms of your own body. This period of wakefulness is not a disorder, it's an opportunity. It's a treasured liminal space between the two halves of the night. What do you do with this time? The possibilities are dictated by your status, your piety, and the pressing needs of your household. As a peasant, your options are simple and practical. You might slip quietly off the palliers, your bare feet silent on the cold, packed earth. The embers in the hearth are almost completely dead, but you can see just enough by the faint starlight filtering through a crack in the wall. You move to the corner where the piglet is sleeping. You check to make sure it's still breathing, that it hasn't gotten tangled in its tether. A healthy pig is a vital family asset, and this quiet moment is a good time to ensure its welfare. Next, you might tend to the fire. Your father banked it carefully, but a little maintenance can ensure it's easier to revive in the morning. You use a small stick to gently poke at the ash-covered coals, consolidating the remaining embers. You might add a single, very dry piece of wood, not enough to create a flame, but just enough to provide fuel for the smouldering coals, ensuring a spark of life will remain until dawn. This small act is a crucial piece of household management, the ideal death, the good death, or ars moriendi, as it was later known in popular texts, was a carefully orchestrated ritual. It involved being surrounded by family, receiving the last rites from a priest, viaticum, confessing your sins one last time, and consciously commending your soul to God. To die suddenly without this preparation, to be struck by lightning, to fall from a horse, or to simply slip away in the night, was considered a bad death. It was terrifying because it robbed you of the chance to wipe your spiritual slate clean. This is a mainstream historical fact. The concept of purgatory, a place where souls who died in a state of grace, but were still burdened with minor unexpiated sins could be purified before entering heaven, was a hugely important doctrine in the medieval church. But the fear was that a sudden death, especially with mortal sins on your conscience, might bypass purgatory entirely and send you straight to hell. Your mind, now fully engaged in this spiritual panic, begins to picture hell. You don't have to work very hard. The imagery is everywhere. You've seen it in the terrifying doom paintings on the wall above the main arch of your church. These vivid frescoes show, in graphic detail, the Last Judgment. On one side, the serene, orderly procession of the saved being welcomed into paradise by angels. On the other, a chaotic, horrific scene of the damned being dragged into the gaping, fiery mouth of hell by hideous, grinning demons. You've seen the images of sinners being boiled in cauldrons, roasted on spits, force-fed molten gold, and tormented by snakes and monstrous beasts for all eternity. This is not a metaphor for a bad state of mind. To you, this is a literal physical place, as real as the town down the road, and the possibility of ending up there is very, very real. A quirky and revealing tidbit is the popularity of specific prayers and charms against sudden death. People would pray to certain saints who were believed to offer protection. St. Christopher, the patron saint of travellers, was often invoked, as travel was a common cause of accidental death. A popular belief held that anyone who looked upon an image of St. Christopher would not die a sudden death that day. This is why huge paintings of him were often placed in churches opposite the main entrance, so he would be the first thing you saw upon entering. It was a form of spiritual insurance. You might silently whisper a prayer to Saint Christopher now, a desperate plea to make it through the night. The fear of hell was skillfully wielded by the church as a tool of social control, encouraging conformity and piety. But historians still argue about the personal psychological impact of this doctrine on the average person. Did it create a pervasive culture of fear and anxiety, a kind of collective spiritual neurosis? Or did people develop a more pragmatic relationship with sin and salvation, trusting in the regular cycle of confession and the mercy of God to see them through? For you tonight, the fear is anything but pragmatic. It feels acute and personal. What if the dull ache in your tooth isn't just a toothache? What if it's the beginning of a fatal infection? A fever that will steal your wits and then your life before the priest can be summoned? What if one of the rats scurrying in the thatch carries a disease that will strike you down in your sleep? Your own mortality feels suddenly, terrifyingly fragile. The quiet wakefulness of the watch begins to dissolve. Your mind, once clear and alert, grows fuzzy at the edges. A deep, bone-bred weariness, different from the frantic exhaustion of the evening, settles over you. You shift on the rustling straw, finding a new position in the familial tangle. You pull a corner of the greasy woolen blanket up to your chin. Without anxiety or effort, you feel yourself beginning to drift away again. You are now entering the second major phase of your nightly rest, the second sleep. If first sleep was a deep, nearly bottomless plunge into oblivion, second sleep is a gentler, shallower current. It would last for another 3 to 4 hours, essentially taking you from the middle of the night right up to the first grey hint of dawn. While your first sleep was often dreamless, a pure, restorative shutdown of the system, second sleep was known to be the prime time for dreaming. The dreams you have during second sleep are often vivid and strange. The brain, having sorted and filed the mundane data of the previous day during first sleep, is now free to play. You might dream of flying over the fields you spend your days toiling in, or of a feast with endless piles of food, a common fantasy for the hungry. But your dreams are also coloured by the anxieties and beliefs of your world. You might have a terrifying dream of being chased by a wolf through a dark forest, or a more unsettling dream where a saint appears before you with a cryptic message. In your world, dreams are not just random neurological firings, as a modern scientist might say, they're taken very seriously. A mainstream historical fact is that dreams were often seen as a conduit for supernatural messages. They could be visions sent from God, offering guidance or prophecy. They could be temptations sent by the devil, designed to lead your soul astray. Or they could be portents of the future, a glimpse into things to come. The Bible is filled with stories of important, prophetic dreams. Joseph interpreting the Pharaoh's dreams, for example, and this lent a powerful credence to the idea that dreams had meaning. If you had a particularly vivid or disturbing dream during your second sleep, you wouldn't just shake it off in the morning. You might discuss it in hushed tones with your mother, or even seek out the priest for an interpretation. A dream of a snake might be a warning of a hidden enemy. A dream of falling could signify a fall from grace. This belief in the power of dreams added another layer of complexity and potential anxiety to the act of sleeping. The purpose of this two-part sleep cycle was likely deeply practical, an evolutionary adaptation to the pre-industrial world. The first deep sleep provided the essential physical recovery from a day of hard labour. It was about muscle repair and raw physical restoration. The waking watch provided a safe, quiet time for essential tasks, social bonding, and spiritual reflection in a world, energy. For these few precious hours you are blessedly free from the cold, the heat, the pests, and the anxieties that plagued your waking mind. A mainstream historical fact is that this pattern of segmented sleep is not just speculation. It's copiously documented in historical records from ancient Greece all the way through to the early 19th century. We find references to it in diaries, in medical texts, in court records, and in literature. In Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, characters go to bed, wake up, have conversations, and then go back to sleep. In a French physician's guide from the 16th century, he advises couples that the best time for conception is not at the end of a weary day, but after their first sleep, when they would have more energy and do it better. The existence of first and second sleep was so commonplace that it was rarely explained, just as we today wouldn't bother to explain what lunch is. It was simply the natural way of things. The end of first sleep was not jarring, like a modern alarm clock. It was a gentle, natural rousing. You would simply drift up from the depths of unconsciousness, slowly becoming aware of your surroundings again. You might roll over, stretch, and find yourself, without any sense of panic or disorientation, fully awake. It's midnight, or perhaps 1 in the morning. The house is silent, save for the soft breathing of your still sleeping family. The embers of the fire are just a faint, fading memory of warmth. The night is at its deepest and darkest, and now you have a period of quiet wakefulness ahead of you, a space of 1 to 2 hours that was a normal and expected part of the night. This interval, sometimes called the watch, or simply the waking period, would seem utterly bizarre to most people today. A modern person waking up at 1 a.m. and finding themselves unable to fall back asleep for an hour would likely panic, thinking they have insomnia. They might reach for their phone, turn on the TV, or take a sleeping pill. But for you, this is normal. This is part of the rhythm. A quirky tidbit is the sheer variety of activities people undertook during this midnight waking period. It was a uniquely private and tranquil time in a world that offered very little of either. For the literate minority, it was a time to read by candlelight or ponder over philosophical texts. For the devout, it was the perfect time for quiet prayer and contemplation, a personal communion with God away from the public performance of church services. Some people would get up and perform small, quiet chores, mending a tool, checking on the livestock, or adding a log to the fire. It was also a time for conversation. Husbands and wives might have their most intimate talks during this period. You and your sister, both awake, might whisper quietly in the dark, sharing secrets or fears you wouldn't voice in the light of day. It was a time for reflection, for thinking over the events of the day or planning for the next. Historians still argue about the primary driver for the disappearance of segmented sleep. The most popular theory links it to the advent and proliferation of cheap, effective artificial lighting, first with gas lamps in the 19th century and then with the electric light bulb. As lighting improved, people's evenings were extended. Bedtimes were pushed later and later, compressing the sleep period and consolidating it into a single, uninterrupted block. Social attitudes also shifted, with no other private time. The second sleep, being lighter, served a different purpose. It was a longer, less critical phase of rest that brought you gently towards the morning. Being in a lighter state of sleep also had a key survival advantage. As dawn approached, the dangers of the night might change. A predator might make a final bold attempt to get at your livestock. A thief might use the pre-dawn gloom as cover. Being in a lighter sleep meant you were more easily roused by a strange sound, the bleating of a distressed sheep or the crack of a twig that sounds too much like a footstep. Your second sleep kept you resting, but also kept you closer to the surface of consciousness, a biological alarm system ready to be tripped. A quirky tidbit related to second sleep is its appearance in legal documents. There are court records from the period where witnesses give testimony based on when something happened relative to the sleep cycle. A witness might state that they heard a cry after my first sleep, or that a man left the house during his second sleep. This shows how deeply this rhythm was embedded in the fabric of society. It was a common, understood marker of time, as reliable as midday or dusk. Historians still argue about the biological underpinnings of segmented sleep. Is it humanity's natural default sleep pattern, which we have only recently abandoned due to artificial light? Or is it a flexible adaptation to specific environmental conditions? Some modern experiments have placed volunteers in environments without any artificial light for long periods. The results have shown that their sleep patterns often naturally drift into a segmented two-part cycle, with a 1 to 2 hour waking period in the middle of the night. This suggests that the 8 solid hours we strive for today might actually be the historical anomaly. Our internal clocks, it seems, may still be set to a medieval rhythm. You're deep in the middle of your second sleep now. You're not as profoundly unconscious as you were during your first slumber. You are aware on some low level of the world around you. You might roll over when your brother kicks you, or pull the blanket back when your sister steals it, all without truly waking. You are drifting, dreaming, and waiting. The hard work of recovery is done. Now you're simply passing the remaining hours of darkness in a state of gentle rest, your body preparing itself for the inevitable, harsh awakening that will come with the first light of the sun. The second sleep is not an end in itself. It's a bridge, carrying you across the last stretch of the night towards the shore of the coming day. You're adrift in the hazy, dream-filled ocean of your second sleep. The vivid images in your mind, a field of impossibly large cabbages, the face of a forgotten ancestor, are suddenly shattered by a sound. It's not a sound from within your hovel, nor is it a sound from the nearby woods. It's a sound that seems to come from the sky itself, a deep, resonant and insistent bong, 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 that rolls across the dark, sleeping landscape. It's the great bronze bell of the village church, and it is calling the devout to prayer. So the monks' prayers were a holy vigil, a shining light of faith in the heart of the devil's favourite hour. A quirky and rather endearing tidbit is the concept of the naughty monk who struggled to stay awake. There are tales and illustrations from the period depicting monks nodding off during the long service, their heads slumping onto their chests. Some monasteries even had a designated official, sometimes called a circuiter, whose job was to walk around the chapel during the nocturnal service with a lantern. If he saw a monk dozing, he would shine the lantern in his face or tap him on the shoulder as a gentle, or not so gentle reminder to stay awake and focused on his sacred duty. It's a very humanising detail. a reminder that even these men of God struggled with the basic human need for sleep. Historians still argue about the long-term health effects of this rigorously interrupted sleep schedule. Did it lead to a state of chronic sleep deprivation? Or did the monks' bodies adapt to this polyphasic sleep pattern of short naps and long vigils? The monastic diet was often meagre, and their lives were a combination of manual labour in the monastery's fields and long hours of sedentary prayer. It was a physically and mentally demanding existence, and the lack of consolidated sleep was a major part of that challenge. Back in your hovel, the sound of the church bell has faded. The distant, faint chanting of the monks, if you can hear it at all, is just a low, humming drone on the edge of your perception. For you, the bell is a landmark in the dark, a signal that the deepest part of the night is passing, and the dawn is not far off. You're not required to rise. Your duty is to the fields, to your family, to the endless cycle of work and survival. You're allowed to remain in your shallow, dream-filled second sleep. But the sound is a powerful reminder that even the night is structured, ordered, and claimed by the power of the church. Even in the most personal and private act of sleeping, you are never truly outside the framework of your faith. The bell is a thread that connects your small worldly life to the larger spiritual battle being waged in the cold, dark chapel on the hill. The last echo of the monastery bell has dissolved into the pre-dawn stillness. You're in that strange, shallow state of sleep where you're not quite dreaming but not yet awake. The world is grey and silent. But then a new sound, sharp and close, slices through the quiet. It's the panicked bleating of a sheep from the small makeshift pen just outside your hovel. It's not the normal, placid sound the animal makes. This is a cry of terror. Instantly, you are wide awake. Every ounce of drowsiness vanishes, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. Your father is already moving, his silhouette rising from the palliasse in a single fluid motion. He grabs the heavy wood axe that he keeps leaning against the wall near the door, a tool for chopping wood that doubles as a weapon. The sheep's bleating becomes a choked gurgling sound and then falls silent. This time was also perfect for attending to your own needs. You tiptoe to the chamber pot in the corner, relieving yourself without the urgency or discomfort of having to hold it until morning. It's a small thing, but it contributes to a more comfortable second sleep later. Your mother might wake as well. Perhaps she uses this time to check on your sleeping grandmother, adjusting her position on the straw, or adding a bit of the blanket over her frail shoulders. Or perhaps she has a small, quiet task to perform. She might sit by the hearth and begin to tease out wool fibres with her fingers, preparing them for spinning. It's a task that requires little light and can be done by feel. Every moment of the day and night is an opportunity for productivity in a world where survival depends on constant effort. The historical records are full of examples of how people used this time. For the literate elite, this was a golden hour for study and creativity. The English jurist Sir Edward Coke wrote that the waking watch was a time for quiet contemplation, calling it the golden hour for study. The poet William Wordsworth was known to compose verses in his head during this period. It was a time free from the distractions of the day when the mind was perceived to be unusually sharp and receptive to new ideas. For the deeply religious, this period had a profound spiritual significance. It was a time for private prayer, for introspection, and for reading devotional texts if one had the means and the literacy. This personal, quiet communion with God was a different kind of worship from the public, ritualised services in the church. It was intimate and reflective. A quirky tidbit from the period comes from the letters of a 16th century English clergyman who advised his flock to use their waking time to meditate on their own mortality, not in a fearful way, but as a way to prepare their souls and live a more pious life. He essentially prescribed the very anxiety you were feeling earlier, but framed it as a productive spiritual exercise. And of course, this was a prime time for intimacy. Medical texts from the period, as we've noted, often recommended the time after first sleep for marital relations. Both partners would be rested from the initial deep sleep, less exhausted than at the end of a long day, and the quiet privacy of the night was a rare commodity. Historians still argue about how this segmented sleep pattern might have affected family structures and birth rates. Did this built-in time for intimacy lead to larger families? Or was it simply a more humane and practical schedule for couples in a world of constant labour? You finish your small, quiet tasks. You've checked the pig, tended the fire and used the pot. You slide back onto the straw palliasse. Your sister is awake now too. You don't speak, but you exchange a look of silent understanding in the gloom. This is your shared secret time. You lie there, not trying to force sleep, but simply existing in the quiet dark. The world outside is still and silent, and for the first time all night, your small, smoky hovel feels like a true sanctuary. You're not fighting the night anymore. You're living in it, inhabiting its rhythms. The anxiety is gone, replaced by a sense of peace. You feel your eyelids growing heavy again. The waking watch is coming to a close. Your body knows, without any conscious signal, that it's time for the next phase. It's time for your second sleep. For most people, like you and your family, the night's sleep is bisected by the natural rhythm of first and second sleep. But for a specific subset of the medieval population, monks, nuns, and the most pious clergy, the night was intentionally and ritually broken for a far more structured reason. This is the call to Matins, the most important of the nocturnal canonical hours. Let's leave your straw palliaus for a moment and travel again, this time to the small priory on the edge of the Lord's estate. Inside the stone walls of the monastery, the world is different. The monks sleep not in a communal family pile, but in a long open room called a dormitory, each on their own narrow bed, which is likely still a straw-stuffed pallet, but it is their own. Their sleep was never meant to be a long unbroken rest. It was, like every other part of their day, a structured offering to God. The bell you hear is being rung by a designated sacristan, a monk whose job it is to wake before the others and sound the call to worship. The time is likely around 2 or 3 a.m. For you, this sound is a distant, semi-conscious intrusion into your dreams. For the monks, it is an unequivocal command. They rise immediately from their beds, no matter how cold the dormitory, no matter how weary their bodies. There is no snooze button on a canonical bell. In the flickering light of a few tallow candles, they don their heavy woolen habits and file silently out of the dormitory and into the cold, cavernous space of the monastery chapel. The air is frigid, the stone floors like sheets of ice beneath their simple leather sandals. The only light comes from the altar candles, casting long dancing shadows up the stone pillars. Here they begin the long complex service of Matins. This is not a quick prayer before heading back to bed. It is an extensive and intricate liturgy, consisting of psalms, hymns, readings from the scriptures, and prayers. A mainstream historical fact is that the entire book of Psalms, all 150 of them, was recited by monks every single week as part of this cycle of prayer, with a significant portion being chanted during these nocturnal services. The sound of their voices, joined together in the ancient, unadorned beauty of Gregorian chant, would carry out from the chapel another layer in the night's soundscape. It's a sound of haunting, otherworldly beauty, a testament to a life dedicated to a reality beyond the daily grind of survival. Immediately following Matins is the service of Lauds, the prayer of praise, which is timed to end as the very first hints of dawn appear in the eastern sky. All told, these monks could spend 2 to 3 hours, the entire duration of the waking watch and then some, standing in a cold church chanting and praying. Why? What was the purpose of this punishing schedule? From their perspective, the work of a monk was prayer. They were the spiritual soldiers of the community, and their constant prayers were believed to protect everyone, from the king on his throne to you in your hovel. They prayed for the souls of the living and the dead. They prayed for a good harvest. They prayed to ward off plague and war, and the night was seen as a particularly potent time for this spiritual battle. The darkness was the time when demons and evil forces were thought to be strongest. Your father slides the heavy wooden bar from the door and slips outside into the gloom. You and your mother huddle with the younger children, your hearts pounding in the terrified silence. The dangers of the night are not all supernatural ghosts and formless anxieties. Some of them are very real, very hungry, and have very sharp teeth. While wolves were largely eradicated from England by the end of the 15th century, in other parts of Europe and in earlier periods, they remained a genuine threat to livestock and occasionally to people. A more common threat would be a pack of stray feral dogs, or even a particularly bold fox capable of taking down a young lamb or an unwary chicken. Your livestock is your wealth, your food source, and your security. An attack on them is an attack on your family's survival. But the most immediate and common fear is not from four-legged predators, but from two-legged ones. The darkness provides perfect cover for thieves, bandits, and vagrants. In a world without a formal police force, streetlights, or home security systems, you are entirely responsible for your own protection. Your flimsy wooden door and the heavy bar across it are your only defence. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval society had a significant population of marginalised and desperate people. Famines, wars and plagues could leave thousands destitute and homeless. These masterless men and landless peasants often roamed the countryside, living by their wits, by begging, and when desperation hit, by theft. A lone hovel like yours, set apart from the main village, could be a tempting target. While you have little of value in terms of gold or jewels, your stored grain, your tools, your livestock, and even your cooking pot are precious commodities worth stealing. Your father returns, his face grim in the faint light. A fox. He got one of the chickens, but the sheep are safe. He bars the door again, but the sense of security is shattered. The adrenaline is still coursing through your veins. Sleep is now impossible. The incident is a stark reminder of how vulnerable you are, how thin the barrier is between your small, orderly world and the chaotic, dangerous one that lurks just outside your walls. This fear was even more acute for those living in towns. We've already experienced the noise of the city, but the dark, narrow, unlit alleyways were notorious havens for criminals. Muggers, or cut-purses, would lurk in the shadows, waiting for a lone traveller or a drunkard stumbling home from the tavern. They would use a knife to slit the strings of a person's purse, which was worn on a belt, and disappear into the darkness before the victim even knew what had happened. Burglary was also a constant threat. A skilled thief could quietly lift a wooden shutter off its hinges, or jimmy a poorly made lock to gain entry to a house while the occupant slept. A quirky, and rather grim, tidbit about medieval justice is how it dealt with these nocturnal criminals. If a homeowner caught a burglar in the act inside their home at night, they were often legally entitled to kill them on the spot. The law made a distinction between a thief caught during the day, who might be just an opportunist, and a nocturnal manslayer caught at night, who was presumed to have more sinister, violent intentions. The darkness itself made the crime more heinous in the eyes of the law. This was known as the right of infang thief, and it essentially turned every homeowner into a potential executioner. Historians still argue about the actual prevalence of violent crime in the Middle Ages compared to modern times. Some data, based on coroners' reports and court records, suggest that the homicide rate in some medieval cities was significantly higher than in most modern Western cities. However, the data is spotty and difficult to interpret. Was life really more violent, or were just more violent incidents being officially recorded? Regardless of the statistics, the fear of violence was certainly a potent and ever-present part of life. Without a reliable state monopoly on violence, i.e. a police force, personal security was a matter of strong doors, vigilant neighbours, and a heavy wood axe by the bed. You lie on your palliasse, listening to the pounding of your own heart. The silence that has returned to the hovel is no longer peaceful. It's tense, charged with the memory of the fox's brief, violent intrusion. You think of the tales travellers tell of organised bandit gangs who haunt the major roadways, or of the desperate, hungry men who might mistake your hovel for an easy target. The night is not a time of rest. It is a time of heightened vulnerability, a long, dark period where the thin veneer of civilization feels like it could be torn away at any moment. Your father is now sitting up, the axe resting across his lap, his eyes fixed on the door. He will not sleep again tonight. He is on watch, and as long as he is on watch, you are safe. But the cost of that safety is, once again, a peaceful night's sleep. The memory of the fox's raid and the fear of two-legged predators eventually fades with the rising sun. But your life, for a brief period, has been uprooted. Perhaps your father has been called to fulfill a labour obligation in a distant part of the lord's estate, or you're accompanying a merchant cousin to a market town a few days' journey away. You're on the road, and you will not be sleeping in your own hovel tonight. As dusk begins to bleed across the sky, you arrive at your only option for shelter, a roadside inn. From the outside, it looks promising. It's a large, timber-framed building, bigger than any house in your village, with a painted sign creaking in the wind, and the warm, inviting glow of firelight visible through its windows. The smell of roasting meat and ale hangs in the air, a welcome change from the usual scent of boiled turnips. But as you step inside, you realise that an inn is not a place of private comfort. It is a public house in every sense of the word, and getting a night's sleep here will be its own unique and formidable challenge. The main room is a chaotic swirl of noise, smoke and humanity. A huge fire roars in the hearth, making the room unbearably hot. The air is thick with the smell of sweat, spilled ale, wet wool, and greasy cooking smoke. Travellers of every description are crowded onto long wooden benches. Dusty merchants, rough-looking soldiers, the solemn-faced friar, and farmers returning from the market. The noise is overwhelming, a dozen different conversations competing with the clatter of wooden plates and the landlord's booming shouts. There is no escape from this public space. There are no private rooms to rent. There is just the common room, and, if you're lucky, a spot in the common bed. After a meagre and overpriced meal of bread and pottage, you ask the innkeeper for lodging. He gestures with his thumb towards a steep, narrow staircase. You climb it, leaving the worst of the noise behind and enter the sleeping quarters. It's a long, low-ceilinged room directly under the rafters, much like the dormitory at the monastery, but without any of the discipline or piety. The floor is lined with 2 or 3 enormous beds. These are not just queen-sized. They're colossal pieces of furniture, wide enough to accommodate a multitude of sleepers. This is where you will be spending the night. A mainstream historical fact is that private rooms in inns were virtually non-existent until the very late Middle Ages and early modern period, and even then they were a luxury reserved for the extremely wealthy. For the average traveller, the only option was to purchase a spot in a communal bed. You would pay your penny or two, and in return you didn't get a room or even a bed to yourself. You got a fractional share of a mattress. The innkeeper points you to a spot on one of the beds. You hesitate. Already asleep in the bed are 2 other men, their forms just lumpy shapes under a coarse blanket. They are complete strangers. One is snoring with the force of a bellows. You have no idea who they are, where they're from, or what their business is. For all you know, one could be an honest merchant and the other a wanted criminal. This is the great gamble of sleeping at an inn. You will be sharing your bed with strangers. Not just in the same room, but in the same physical bed, pressed up against them, sharing their warmth, their smells and their germs. You're expected to strip down to your undershirt, your smock or chemise. Fold your outer clothes neatly to use as a pillow, a clever way to keep them from being stolen, and climb in. A quirky and often unsettling tidbit from the period are the rules of bed sharing that sometimes appeared in etiquette guides. These manuals advise travellers not to scratch themselves too much, not to pass gas loudly, and to be considerate of their bedfellows. One famous rule from a 16th century guide explicitly states, "Nor should you, with any part of your body, touch the one who is sleeping with you, at least not in a way that is annoying." The very existence of such rules tells you just how common and how potentially awkward the problems were. You cautiously get into the designated spot. The mattress is thankfully a step up from your palliers at home. It feels like it's stuffed with wool flocking rather than just straw, but it smells faintly of sour wine and the unwashed bodies of 1,000 previous travellers. And then there's the issue of security. Your money pouch, containing the few coins you have, is tied securely to your belt, and you've tucked it deep under your body. The fear of being robbed by one of your sleeping companions is very real. You lie rigidly still, feigning sleep, but every sense is on high, on alert. The man next to you mutters in his sleep and flings an arm out, brushing against your back. You flinch, your heart pounding. Historians still argue about the social dynamics of the communal inn bed. Was it a place of constant suspicion and potential violence, or did a kind of traveller's code of conduct prevail? It was likely a mixture of both. For the most part, people were simply tired travellers seeking rest, and an unspoken truce held. But the literature and court records of the period are also filled with tales of thefts, brawls, and even murders that took place in these very beds. The inn was a microcosm of society, a place where all social classes were thrown together in a temporary, intimate, and often volatile mix. And let's not forget the pests. The fleas, lice, and bedbugs that plague your own home are seasoned travellers themselves. An inn bed was a bustling international hub for ectoparasites, a place where the fleas of a French merchant could mingle with the lice of an English soldier. The chances of waking up with more than just your own familiar colony of biters are close to 100%. You lie there in the dark, a stranger's snore rumbling inches from your ear, your muscles tense with suspicion. The sounds from the common room below, a sudden burst of laughter, the crash of a dropped mug, filter up through the floorboards. This is a far cry from the familial, if crowded, security of your hovel. There, you're surrounded by your kin. Here, you're surrounded by the unknown. It's a night of shallow, watchful and deeply untrusting sleep, where the greatest threat might be the person breathing next to you. You've endured the suspicious, lumpy intimacy of the in-bed and finally made it back to the relative sanctuary of your own hovel. However, the accumulated sleep debt from your travels, combined with the usual nightly challenges, has left you feeling wrung out and desperate. You find yourself lying awake night after night, your mind racing, your body tired but unable to succumb to rest. You are, in modern terms, suffering from a bout of insomnia, and just like a modern person, you are tempted to seek out a remedy, a sleep aid to help you find the oblivion you crave. But your medieval pharmacy is not stocked with melatonin, Zzzquil, or prescription sleeping pills. Your options are a strange and fascinating mixture of practical herbalism, magical thinking, and potentially dangerous concoctions. Your mother, the keeper of the family's folk medicine wisdom, would be your first port of call. She would likely start with the gentlest and safest remedies. A mainstream historical fact is that certain herbs have been known for their sedative properties for millennia. She might prepare your warm drink, not of milk, but of water infused with chamomile flowers, a timeless remedy for calming the nerves. Or perhaps she'd use valerian root, a powerful and rather pungent herb. Historians still argue about how widespread the use of these powerful narcotic and toxic plants was among the general populace. Were they secret, back-alley remedies used only in the most desperate cases, or was there a more common, low-level use of plants like henbane for general aches and sleeplessness? The secrecy surrounding their use, often tied up with accusations of witchcraft, makes it a difficult subject to study. The wise woman who could cure your insomnia with a henbane-laced drink could just as easily be accused of cursing your neighbour's cow and be burned at the stake. Tonight, you stick with your mother's chamomile tea. The more extreme options are too frightening to contemplate. You sip the warm, fragrant liquid, the familiar floral taste a small comfort in the dark. It may not have the chemical punch of a modern sleeping pill, but it also carries none of the risks. It's a gentle nudge towards slumber, not a violent push. As you lie back down, you hope this simple, ancient magic will be enough. The world of medieval sleep aids is a perfect reflection of the world itself, a thin line between natural wisdom and mortal danger, between a healing herb and a deadly poison. The chamomile tea, or perhaps sheer, accumulated exhaustion, has finally worked its magic. You've navigated the treacherous shoals of wakefulness, and are now deep in the final peaceful moments of your second sleep. The dreams are gentle now, fading wisps of nonsensical images. The world is quiet, cool, and still. For the first time in what feels like an eternity, you are truly, peacefully at rest. And then it comes, a sound that shatters the tranquility with the violence of a hurled stone. Ooh! It's the rooster. The feathered tyrant of the barnyard, the self-appointed herald of the dawn, has unleashed his full-throated, strident cry just a few yards from your hovel. It's not the gentle, distant crowing of a storybook farm. It's a raw, piercing and shockingly loud alarm clock, and it has no snooze button. His first cry is immediately answered by another rooster from a neighbouring hovel, and then another, until the entire village is engulfed in a cacophony of competitive crowing. This is it. The night is officially over, your brief hard-won peace is shattered, and the day is demanding your attention with unapologetic aggression. You groan and roll over on the lumpy straw, pulling the blanket over your head in a futile attempt to reclaim the darkness. But it's no use. The sound seems to penetrate your very skull, and it's not just the noise. Through the cracks in the wall and the shuttered window, you can perceive a subtle shift in the quality of the light. The absolute black of the deep night has softened into a that is still used today as a key ingredient in many natural sleep aids. Linden flower or lemon balm tea were also popular choices, believed to soothe the mind and prepare the body for rest. If the warm drinks don't work, she might move on to a more physical application. A popular remedy, rooted in the humoral theory of medicine, was the application of a cooling poultice to the head or feet. Remember the lettuce leaves for a hot night? That same principle applied here. Insomnia was often seen as a condition of excess heat or agitation in the brain. Therefore, applying something cool and moist was thought to calm it down. Your mother might mash up lettuce or cucumber leaves, or even just soak a cloth in cool water infused with rose petals or violets, and bind it to your forehead. The gentle pressure and coolness might in themselves be soothing, even if the medical theory behind it was flawed. But if your sleeplessness persists, you might be tempted to seek out more potent and more dangerous solutions. This is where you enter the world of the apothecary, or perhaps even the local wise woman, whose knowledge of herbs bordered on what the church might consider witchcraft. Here, the plants in question become more powerful, and their effects more dramatic. The most common and effective sleep inducer in the medieval pharmacopoeia was the opium poppy. The psychoactive properties of the poppy, from which both opium and morphine are derived, have been known since antiquity. An apothecary could sell you a small amount of dried poppy latex, or a syrupy concoction known as laudanum, though the term became more common later, which was a mixture of opium, wine and other spices. A small dose would undoubtedly send you to sleep. It would be a heavy, dream-filled and possibly stupor-like state. The problem, of course, was the dosage. There was no scientific standardization. A dose that was calming for one person could be fatal for another. The line between a medicinal sleep and a permanent one was terrifyingly thin. It was a remedy of last resort. Another group of powerful and frankly terrifying sleep aids belonged to the nightshade family. Plants like henbane, mandrake and deadly nightshade, belladonna, were all known for their potent narcotic and hallucinogenic properties. A quirky and fascinating historical tidbit is the recipe for a medieval anaesthetic sponge, or spongia somnifera. An apothecary would soak a sea sponge in a potent cocktail of opium, henbane, mandrake root, and other sedatives, and then let it dry. When it was time for a surgery, the sponge would be moistened and held over the patient's nose and mouth. The fumes they inhaled would induce a state of deep unconsciousness, allowing the barber surgeon to perform his grim work. You wouldn't be undergoing surgery, but a much diluted version of one of these ingredients might be offered as a sleep aid. A tiny amount of henbane in a cup of wine, for example. The problem is that these plants are all highly toxic. They can cause bizarre and terrifying hallucinations, paralysis, and cardiac arrest. The sleep they induced could easily be accompanied by visions of the demonic creatures you fear, blurring the line between a remedy and a poison. The legendary mandrake root, which was famously believed to scream when pulled from the ground, was a particularly feared and respected ingredient in these dangerous preparations, are beginning to stir, grumbling and rubbing the sleep from their eyes. The day has begun, whether you're ready for it or not. Your brief and troubled journey through the medieval night is over. You have battled the cold, the heat, the pests, the smells, the noises, the fears, and your own aching body. You have experienced the strange rhythm of first and second sleep, and your reward is not a feeling of being refreshed and restored, but a state of low-level, chronic fatigue that you will carry with you throughout the day. You rise to your feet, your head fuzzy and your muscles complaining, and prepare to face the long hours of labour that stretch between this rude awakening and the next, almost impossible attempt at sleep. The rooster's crow has faded, but another, more insistent cry now fills the small hovel. It's the thin, sharp wail of an infant. Throughout our journey, we have focused on your experience of the medieval night, but we have overlooked a crucial factor that, for roughly half the population, made a full and peaceful night's sleep an even more distant fantasy. For the women of this era, the night was not just a time of personal discomfort and fear, but a period of relentless, life-sustaining labour that revolved around the needs of children. Let's shift our perspective for a moment. You are no longer the weary field worker, but your mother. She's endured all the same hardships as you, the cold, the lumpy bed, the pests, the fears. But her night has been punctuated by a series of demands that are entirely her own. She's lying on the same straw palliasse, but next to her is a newborn, her youngest child, swaddled tightly and sleeping in a small wooden cradle she can rock with one hand without fully rising. The baby's cry is a signal for feeding. In a world without formula or baby bottles, breastfeeding was the only option for almost all mothers. This meant that every 2 to 3 hours around the clock the baby would wake and demand to be fed. Your mother would have to rouse herself, no matter what stage of sleep she was in. She would lift the crying infant from its cradle, unlace her tunic and let the baby nurse. This wasn't a peaceful, Hallmark card moment. It was a frequent, exhausting interruption, performed in the cold and the dark, often while she herself was desperate for rest. A mainstream historical fact is that the high infant mortality rate of the period meant that mothers were under immense pressure to keep their babies well fed and warm, and these round-the-clock feedings were a critical part of that survival effort. And it wasn't just feeding. A baby might wake because it was cold, its small body less able to regulate temperature. Your mother would have to press the infant close to her own body, sharing her precious warmth, essentially acting as a human hot water bottle. Or the baby might wake because its swaddling was wet and uncomfortable. In an age before disposable diapers, a baby's nappies, or clouts, were simple squares of linen or wool. When soiled, they had to be. The rooster's crow is a fading echo, the baby's cries have softened to a contented gurgle, and the first true rays of sunlight are now slanting through. The cracks in your hovel, painting stripes of gold across the smoky air. The long, arduous night is finally, definitively over. You stand on the threshold of your home, blinking in the new light, your body aching with a familiar bone-deep fatigue. As you look out at the familiar landscape of your life, the muddy track, the neighbouring hovels, the vast waiting fields, you might wonder, if you had the vocabulary for it, about the legacy of all these sleepless nights. Do these patterns of misery and adaptation simply vanish with the rising sun, or do they leave a permanent mark? We, looking back from our modern vantage point, can see that the way you slept, or failed to sleep, has profound implications. The struggle for slumber in the Middle Ages was not just a series of unfortunate discomforts. It was a formative experience that shaped health, culture, and perhaps even the very wiring of the human brain. The constant battle against the cold, the heat, the pests, and the noise created a state of chronic stress and sleep deprivation that was simply the baseline for normal existence. A mainstream historical fact is that chronic sleep deprivation has serious, measurable health consequences. It weakens the immune system, making people more susceptible to the very illnesses that were a constant threat in your world. It impairs cognitive function, judgment, and memory. It can exacerbate mental health issues, contributing to the anxiety and fear that already haunted the medieval mind. It is not an exaggeration to say that the entire population was likely operating at a significant cognitive and physical deficit compared to their well-rested modern counterparts. The Dark Ages might not have been just a metaphor. It could have been a literal state of mental fog for millions of people. Your segmented sleep pattern, the cycle of first and second sleep with a waking watch in between, is perhaps the most fascinating legacy. As we've discussed, this rhythm disappeared with the advent of artificial lighting. The Industrial Revolution, with its demand for factory workers to adhere to a rigid clock-based schedule, put the final nail in the coffin of biphasic sleep. We compressed our nights into a single, consolidated block, and in doing so, we pathologise the very natural act of waking up in the middle of the night. Think of the modern epidemic of insomnia. Millions of people today take medication because they wake up at 3 a.m. and can't immediately fall back asleep. They see it as a medical disorder. But what if, for many of them, it's not a disorder at all? What if it's an echo of an ancient ingrained biological rhythm, a ghost of the segmented sleep your body takes for granted? Some sleep researchers and historians have proposed exactly this. They argue that our modern expectation of a perfect, uninterrupted 8 hours is the real historical anomaly, and changed. This meant unswaddling the wailing infant in the frigid air, cleaning it as best she could with a damp rag, and rewrapping it in a clean, or at least a drier cloth. This was a miserable task in the dead of a winter night. The night was also a time of great danger for infants. The practice of co-sleeping, while essential for warmth and bonding, carried the risk of accidental suffocation. A deeply exhausted parent could roll over onto their baby in the crowded family bed. This was a recognised tragedy, so common that it was often addressed by church law. Priests would warn their congregations about the dangers of overlaying, and might even assign a penance to parents whose child died in this manner, even if it was a complete accident. To prevent this, many families used the simple wooden cradle we've mentioned, or a small wicker basket, to give the infant its own protected space, but it would still be kept within arm's reach of the mother. Beyond the constant demands of infants, the night was also the most common time for childbirth itself. Labour often begins in the evening or overnight hours, and a medieval birth was a terrifying and dangerous ordeal. It would take place right here, in this one-room hovel, with no doctors, no sterile equipment, and no pain relief. The only assistance would come from a local midwife and the other women of the village. The husband and male children would be shooed out of the house, leaving the women to manage the life and death struggle within. The night would be filled with the mother's cries of pain, the encouraging shouts of the midwife, and the fervent prayers of everyone present. A quirky and poignant tidbit is the use of birth girdles. These were long scrolls, often made of parchment or silk, inscribed with prayers, magical charms, and the names of saints, particularly Saint Margaret, the patron saint of childbirth. The midwife would wrap this girdle around the labouring woman's belly, believing that its holy power would ease the pain and ensure a safe delivery. The Church of England owned several of these and would loan them out to royal and noble women, a testament to how seriously this blend of faith and magic was taken at all levels of society. Historians still argue about the role and status of the female midwife. Was she a respected, if unlicensed, medical practitioner with a wealth of empirical knowledge passed down through generations? Or was she often viewed with suspicion, a figure associated with the mysterious and messy business of birth, and someone who could easily be blamed and accused of witchcraft if the birth went wrong? The reality was likely a complex mixture of both. For a woman in the Middle Ages, the night was therefore a landscape of profound biological and social responsibility. Her sleep was not her own. It was a resource to be constantly interrupted for the sake of her children. The cycle of pregnancy, childbirth and nursing dominated the lives of most women from marriage until menopause. This meant that for decades, an unbroken night's sleep was not just unlikely, it was structurally impossible. The chronic sleep deprivation that we've seen as a feature of medieval life was for women magnified to an extraordinary degree. As you watch your mother soothe her crying infant, you see a quiet heroism that is hazy, indistinct grey. This is the gloaming, the twilight before the sunrise, and it is the universal signal to your world that the time for rest is over. Your father is already stirring, his movements economical and practised. There is no lingering in bed, no gentle easing into the day. The moment the rooster crows and the first light appears, the day's work begins. He moves to the hearth and, using a small hand bellows, coaxes the preserved embers from last night back to life. A few small dry twigs are added, and soon a tiny hopeful flame flickers in the darkness, pushing back the gloom and offering the first meagre warmth of the day. This is the tyranny of a world governed by the sun. A mainstream historical fact is that the concept of time for the vast majority of people in the Middle Ages was not measured in precise, equal hours, but in temporal hours. The period of daylight from sunrise to sunset was divided into 12 equal hours. This meant that a daylight hour in the long days of summer could be as long as 75 minutes, while a daylight hour in the depths of winter might only be 45 minutes long. Your life was not dictated by a clock on the wall, but by the available light. And the rooster was the living embodiment of that clock. His crow meant the working day had started, regardless of how you felt. There are no weekends, no bank holidays, no concept of sleeping in. The only day of rest is Sunday, and even that is filled with the obligation of church services. Every other day is a work day. The cows need to be milked, the fields need to be ploughed, the weeds need to be pulled. Survival is a relentless 7 days a week enterprise, with a brief pause for piety, and it waits for no one. Your personal feelings of fatigue are an irrelevant luxury. A quirky tidbit that illustrates the inescapable nature of this solar schedule is the legal and social importance of the rooster. In some medieval legal codes, the crowing of the cock was a recognised time marker. A contract might state that a payment was due at the first cock's crow. It was also a symbol of vigilance and a warning against sloth. The rooster's call was seen as a moral imperative, a call to rise and be productive, a rebuke to the laziness that was considered a sin. To sleep past the rooster's crow was to be seen as lazy and unreliable. Historians still argue about whether this natural schedule was healthier or more brutal than our modern clock-driven one. On the one hand, it was a life synced with the natural cycles of light and dark, a rhythm our bodies may be evolutionarily adapted to. There was no blue light from screens disrupting melatonin production, no arbitrary 8 a.m. start time that ignored the changing seasons. On the other hand, it was an absolutely unforgiving system. There was no flexibility. The demands of an agricultural society were immediate and non-negotiable. If you were sick, exhausted, or simply needed more rest, the rooster didn't care. The sun didn't care. The cows didn't care. You finally give up the fight. You push the blanket off and sit up, your body stiff and aching from the lumpy bed. The air in the hovel is cold and smells of stale sleep and the fresh, sharp scent of the newly kindled fire. Your mother is already up, fetching water from the well, your siblings. It creates a huge amount of unnecessary anxiety for people whose bodies are simply trying to revert to a more natural ancestral pattern. This is a powerful and quirky modern tidbit. Your sleep problems might just be your inner peasant trying to get out. The legacy can also be seen in our culture. The fears that populated your night, of demons, ghosts and things that go bump in the dark, did not simply vanish with the invention of the light bulb. They burrowed deep into our folklore, our literature and our horror movies. The nightmare that you feared as a literal demon became a metaphor for a bad dream, but the terror it represents is still with us. The association of the night with danger, vulnerability, and the supernatural is a direct inheritance from a time when the darkness was a real and present threat, not just an absence of light. Historians still argue about the overall quality of life in the Middle Ages. Was it a period of unrelenting misery, or do we romanticize the past in our own way, overlooking the strong community bonds and simpler way of life? The story of your night offers a compelling case for the misery side of the argument. The sheer compounding weight of the physical discomforts, the itchy pests, the smells, the crowded beds, the aches and pains, paints a picture of a world where true restorative rest was a luxury few could ever achieve. You take one last look at your straw palliasse, now just a lumpy sack in the corner of the room. It was your battlefield, your sanctuary, your torture device, and your refuge. It was the stage upon which all the dramas of the night played out. You survived another night. That in itself is a victory. The challenges were immense, the comforts non-existent, and the peace fleeting, but you endured. And in that endurance, you're a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Now the sun is up, the rooster has done its work, and the fields are waiting. There is no time to dwell on the night. There is only time to work, to live, and to gather the strength to face it all again when the sun goes down. And so, as we leave that distant, difficult past behind, let the frantic energy of the rooster's crow soften and fade, replaced by the gentle, steady rhythm of your own breathing. The harsh realities of that cold, straw-filled world can recede, dissolving like a strange dream upon waking. Feel the solid comfort of your own bed beneath you, a silent testament to centuries of change, a quiet luxury that would have been an unimaginable fantasy to the person we just left behind. Allow the weight of your own body to grow heavy, sinking into the softness, releasing the tensions of the day and the echoes of that other harder life. The darkness of your own room is not a threat but a comfort. It is not a void filled with fears, but a peaceful sanctuary that you have created, safe and warm and entirely your own. Let the story of that struggle for sleep serve as a quiet reminder of the profound peace that is available to you now, a gentle current to carry you out into a deep and truly restorative rest, a slumber untroubled by biting pests or chilling draughts, a sleep so peaceful and so deep that it can last uninterrupted all the way until morning.